Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku was killed by Bakugou and became a ghost? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. It wasn't supposed to turn out like that. Deku was always so resistant. He was supposed to ignore Katsuki's request. He wasn't supposed to the jump, or the swan dive as he regretfully recalls saying. When Katsuki first heard the news on that fateful day, he didn't know how to react. There was a silent stillness as he contemplated what exactly the police officer was telling him. Hours later, it seemed, it finally sunk in. Katsuki could be heard letting loose the loudest scream as he sobbed about the loss of the one person who wasn't drawn to him because of his quirk or his power. But his deadly and explosive personality, or maybe was it because Deku had no other friends? Fuck that. Katsuki had no fucking idea why a stupid nerd like Deku would hang around him when it was all his fault. It was because of him that Deku was gone. The one person who had the best heart and the brightest smile. He was Katsuki, dared to say, his best friend. Yet, as per usual, his pride had blinded him and his quirk had deafened him to the power that Deku held. A smile. Even when he was sure the stupid nerd looked down on him, he never deserved to die. However, as per usual, Katsuki would never voice his issues or his pain because of his one weakness. After his fit, in which his parents decided to leave him alone for, he came to a realization. Katsuki sprinted across his house while his parents were looking at him sadly. They shouted his name as he opened the door and ran outside, but thankfully decided not to follow. Katsuki kept running until he reached the crime scene. His school. There he remembered a scorched notebook thrown into a koi pond. Katsuki saw said notebook floating near the fishes who were curiously swimming around it. Katsuki gently lifted Deku's prized number 13 hero analysis notebook, more gentle than he had been in his entire life, probably. Katsuki was clutching the book to his chest as he slowly walked back home. He held it almost as if the book were a lifeline, because to Katsuki, it was Deku's. Returning home, his parents scolded him and attempted to get him to open up about why he ran out unexplained, but their pleas fell on deaf ears as Katsuki closed his bedroom door in their faces, making sure to lock it, surrendering to the silence which accompanied him. Katsuki's trance was lifted as he felt a tear sliding down his face. He fled to a dark corner in his room, clutching Deku's notebook close to chest as he sobbed into it. The scorch marks on the book a reminder of what he had done. A few hours later, Katsuki heard his mother, Mitsuki, in the softest voice he had ever heard from her say, "Katsuki, your dinner is right outside." He heard the plate filled with food being set outside his room. "Can I come in?" Mitsuki seemed to choke on her words a bit. "You know you can trust us, right? We'll always be here for you. Please talk to us." The only answer she received was silence, and as she backed away from the door, Katsuki could only think, if I wasn't there for Deku, why should you be there for me? Mitsuki walked to the dining room where her and her husband, Masaru, had dinner without their son. Masaru stood up from his chair and enveloped Mitsuki in a hug as she shed the tears welling up in her eyes. "Where did we go wrong?" Mitsuki sobbed as her normally harsh demeanor was reduced by the grief and anger she felt towards her son. Masaru held her as she continued sobbing, providing no answer for her question. And during breakfast the next morning, Mitsuki discovered the plate of food she set out the previous night lying exactly where it was before, untouched. No one had realized, but that night was a breaking point for Bakugou Katsuki. He had changed in a way no one had expected or wanting to accept. A stubborn part of his brain refused to believe that Deku was truly dead, and as the weeks passed the denial only grew. As middle school ended, and Katsuki was left as the loner, to his choice. No one wanted to mess with him because of his quirk, which he had refused to use anymore in tribute to Deku. Which to most people was quite stupid. Mitsuki and Masaru noticed while Katsuki still kept his harsh attitude and fiery demeanor, he was still quite vulnerable and had built high walls to keep out anyone. Mitsuki was just glad he was talking again, especially to them. He also refused to even look at Midoriya Inko because of the heavy guilt that weighed on him. After all, she was going through her own troubles anyways, ones which were all Katsuki's fault. Hey, Katsuki, are you applying to UA like we dreamed of? Deku had asked one day. Course I will, nerd. But I'm not using my quirk. Katsuki scoffed as he read Deku's number 13 hero analysis book, which he always had on him. The ink had run a bit, but Katsuki still made it his mission to read it, even if it was like the 1,000th time he had. Kaken, don't be like that. It's always been your dream. You can't give up now. Deku exclaimed as he attempted to convince his friend. It's not giving up. Katsuki frowned, looking up. If you can't apply because of me, why should I? The way it was said made it seem like Deku had been wounded or even discouraged, not dead. I will honor I dream. For you and me. However, my quirk already damages people and objects, so I'm doing this how you would. General studies, he finalized as he looked back down at the book. How sweet of you, Kaken. Deku smiled wide before hugging him. Katsuki could see how he had frowned before, but the nerd knew that he wouldn't change his mind. Don't get used to it, nerd, Katsuki mumbled. While he disliked his personality because of how much he hurt Deku with it, who was essentially his brother, he didn't need extras chumming up to him, so he dealt with it. Although, his powerful quirk had boosted his ego so high it caused others pain that Katsuki could barely stand using it. You should talk to Inko, Deku tried after a silence had spread over the two. Deku had tried to let Katsuki let go of the incident, and he would never stop trying. No way in dash, Katsuki started, but got interrupted by his mother opening the door. Hey, talking to Deku again? She asked, although to her it seemed Katsuki was having a one-sided conversation with himself. Yeah. Katsuki nodded, only half listening. Are you going to apply for UA? She asked gently. After the incident, she treated Katsuki like a porcelain doll, as if he were about to break at any moment, and so she had to walk carefully or else it would be the end. Katsuki hated that. General studies is all Katsuki says, his tone annoyed and laced with get the fuck out. Mitsuki just nodded as she closed the door and let out a deep sigh. What had happened to her son? She knew by now he enjoyed talking to Deku, who wasn't even real. It took many failed attempts at therapy for Katsuki for her to realize Deku was there to stay in Katsuki's mind, haunting him and reminding him of his worst mistake, his worst action which he regrets every hour. Katsuki may seem crazy as he talks to himself and what he believed to be Deku, but the reality is he's just broken. That's what Katsuki's denial spread, a desperate wish that would never come true. Katsuki knew he was smart, intelligent. He didn't pride himself on being wise or having great amounts of common sense, not that he would ever tell anyone that. As Deku put it, he would have had great common sense if not for his anger blinding him and causing him to act without rationality. It happened too often for Katsuki to brush it off as a one-time thing. That frustrated him exponentially. It hindered him from being the best. But, then again, he would claim he already is the best even if his stupid nerd likes to correct his every move. One case of this was when Katsuki was busying himself by taking a practice test. He told stupid Deku to shut up and be quiet so he could focus for the test. And as Katsuki went through each section, math, Japanese, English, and science, he found that the knowledge obviously came easy to him. He was a genius after all. However, once he reached the history section, things started to go awry. History wasn't his favorite subject. He preferred math because everything had an explanation. There was rarely anything that couldn't be explained, and Katsuki liked that. He liked having an explanation for things. It made him feel safe. Emotions are fragile, and math isn't subject to that. Japanese and English were similar, but kinda boring for Katsuki. He didn't see the point of writing things perfectly like a puzzle and making sure every piece fit in nicely. Then again, he was pretty good at both, so he didn't complain much. In another life, Katsuki would most likely love science, and he occasionally enjoyed it, but other times it reminded him too much of his quirk and the nitroglycerin which he sweat. History, on the other hand, was the opposite of math. Most of it was caused by fragile emotions, vengeance, and hate. All things Katsuki was guilty of. He was an example of the reason why bad history exists. And while Katsuki is aware of it, he hates it. He doesn't always pay attention to history lessons. It's as if he doesn't know about it, it didn't happen. Which was laughable at best. It clearly happened and Katsuki knew he was being a dumbass, but he still didn't like history class, leading to his problem during the practice test. He had no clue about half the stuff. He'd usually have some nerd Deku do his history homework for him, because he never liked it. No one really had an explanation for history. Katsuki tried his best but felt a bit stumped. That is, until Deku stepped in. Kaken. Kaken. Deku whispered as if he was about to be caught. I'm busy, nerd, Katsuki sighed, but he relented. What? I know you don't like cheating, but you're having such a hard time and I thought I could help because history is a subject I'm really good at. You probably already know that. You don't call me a nerd for nothing, but still, I dash. Nerd, spit it out. The answer to number 12 is the Meiji period. Deku shouted. Nerd. I don't want you giving me the answers. But dash. No buts. Hear me out. You're not good at history, there I said it. I can help you and this is only a practice test. Deku's true feeling came out. Katsuki knew what he was saying was right, but he still wasn't a cheater. Even though no one could see, Deku didn't mean he could take advantage of him to cheat. He had to be the best naturally, not because of some stupid nerd giving him the answers. No. Come on, Kaken, let me help you. Ever since the accident, Deku realized that Katsuki would never do anything to him, and the cowering was replaced by confidence. Katsuki didn't mind it. After all, he deserved to be himself and not who he thought Katsuki would want. And with that, Katsuki knew Deku as his stubborn self, and that he wouldn't budge on helping him with the test. Look, nerd, I'll compromise. You can't help me during the test, however I'll allow you to tutor me in history. Katsuki sighed as he leaned back in his chair. Thank you. Keep doing the test, and then I'll see how much help you need. Deku jumped up in excitement. Katsuki, after filling in Meiji period for number 12 and sticking his tongue out at Deku, found that he was dreadful at history. He just needed help when it came to remembering dates and the lengths for the periods. He remembered almost all of the wars, his violent personality finally helping him for something. Wars were interesting, but the causes for them were beyond Katsuki sometimes. Other times they hit a little too close to home. And that wasn't the only time Deku corrected Katsuki, which he was always half grateful for and half annoyed about. The nerd was smart, he'll give him that, but he could also be annoying as hell. With Deku's tutoring, Katsuki felt like he would crush all his competition. But then again, most of the extras in general studies were just rejects for the heroic course, so it's not like there was any competition to speak of. Still, to Katsuki's chagrin, there was a full auditorium of losers, who all probably had the most useless quirks and their only hope to go to UDA was through general studies. Dumb asses. That's rude, Kaken, Deku exclaimed, to which Katsuki just snorted as he found his seat with a frowning Deku trailing behind him. After a few minutes, a certain pro hero stepped out onto the stage and greeted the extras and Katsuki. Hello, listeners. Present Mike yelled out enthusiastically, can everybody say, hey? Deku was the only voice shouting out, but to everyone else it was silent. As Present Mike started his spiel about the written test and how everyone was split up into different rooms to take it and such, Katsuki had to deal with Deku's mumbling about the pro hero. And while it was more interesting than whatever Present Mike had to say, if Katsuki told him to shut up, everyone would look at him weirdly. Instead, Katsuki sent Deku a glare. That's where it all went wrong. The student next to Katsuki looked at him angrily, assuming the glare was for them, and Deku kept talking almost unaffected. Shut up, nerd, Katsuki hissed at Deku. Excuse me, the student said, clearly not getting the memo that the message was meant for Deku, who had finally quieted down. I'm trying to focus here. He's just an asshole, leave him alone. He's not worth it. Another student nudged the one next to Katsuki and sent him a little glare. Katsuki just flipped them off, which made them both huff in frustration. Kaken. Deku crossed his arms. They deserved it. Katsuki murmured as quietly as he could to not raise suspicion. After Present Mike finished his explanation, Katsuki was led to the room he would start his testing in. As he walked towards the room, the tenseness from the auditorium seemed to follow him down the hallways like how Deku always did. Speaking of which, Deku was admiring the halls and the architecture of the one and only Udata High School, to him being there was a dream come true. Even Katsuki had to smile at how excited Deku was. As they drew closer to the door in which the test was to take place, Katsuki could feel himself grow nervous. Although to most he seemed to be a ball of pure anger and violence, he actually had emotions and weaknesses, and not even Deku's reassuring smile could quell Katsuki's anxiousness, even though he knew he was the best out of all the lousy extras applying. When they got to the door, Katsuki instructed Deku to wait outside of the door, receiving odd looks and even a few whispers. Usually Katsuki could play it off as his quirk, but unfortunately he couldn't because the staff at UT already knew his quirk, and it had nothing to do with speaking to himself, as most saw it, so that excuse would be thrown down the drain and made Katsuki look even more of a fool. "Stop staring, idiots. I'm leaving all my nerves at the door, it's a weird family tradition. Now fuck off." Katsuki sneered at the other students who were taking their exam in the same room as him and the facilitator. The students rolled their eyes and the facilitator shrugged, but Katsuki felt fucking proud of his excuse. It was not the weirdest one he had to come up with, but it made enough sense that people would leave him alone. Deku gave Katsuki a thumbs up, and as the rest of the students shuffled into the classroom, Katsuki discreetly flipped off his best friend. While the facilitator listed extra shitty, in Katsuki's opinion, guidelines and checked each student's quirk to make sure no one was harboring a quirk which could help them cheat, Katsuki went through everything Deku had told him to. The nerd, being a bitchy loser, was an intelligent bitchy loser, one Katsuki knew to listen to, at least occasionally. And so, with that he took deep breaths, and when the facilitator gave the instructions to start, he began the entrance exam for UT's General Studies. Katsuki felt that for most of the questions he breezed through them, but others made him think a little harder. The math section was not a problem for Katsuki, and neither was the English section because a lot of it was really basic things. Not everyone had English practice at their junior high schools, although they should have. The Japanese section was okay. Seeing as everyone taking the test knows Japanese, they upped up the difficulty a little bit, but it wasn't anything Katsuki couldn't handle. Science was different. He remembered some of the basic things fine, but some formulas were completely lost in his mind and he ended up randomly guessing on those, although Deku probably wouldn't approve of that. It was his best bet. History, it seemed, went pretty good. A few dates are probably wrong, and while Katsuki would love a perfect score, what matters is being all the other extras who probably aren't even trying, and with that he is confident of a secured win. The test lasted a few hours, and afterwards Katsuki and Deku made it back to the entrance of UT High School. Katsuki had heard whispers of speculation on the Hero Course entrance exam, but he couldn't find it in himself to really care all that much. As the pair walked with the school behind them, Deku finally spoke. "I'm proud of you, Kaken." Katsuki offered a little smile towards the nerd as he put his hands in his pockets and they walked side by side in silence. That is until, "Hey, Kaken, wouldn't it be a good idea to find a way to communicate non-verbally?" Deku questioned. And whilst Katsuki wasn't going to devalue the good question, the timing was questionable. "Stupid nerd. We were having a moment." "Screw the bonding moment," Deku exclaimed. "We have those all the time, and we need a way so that you don't look like you're an insane person. Excuses won't last forever. People will figure out you're lying, and the quirk excuse won't work when you get into UT. When you get into U, the nerd had said. As though Katsuki was guaranteed a spot, which he obviously was, but Deku's confidence in him made him feel at least a speck of proudness. It felt good knowing Deku believed in him, even when he didn't. "It's a good point," Katsuki grumbled. "I'll look into it." The smile on Deku's face was worth the compromise. Mitsuki was having a hard time. She was fed up with her son's bullshit. It was Deku this and Deku that. Couldn't he just see that Izuku was dead? He wasn't going to come back anytime either. He was gone forever, and yet his stubborn ass refused to believe it. Therapy didn't work, and Mitsuki knew it probably never would. Being stubborn was a family trait, Mitsuki knew that. She was guilty of being stubborn more times than she would like to admit, but this was too far. He seemed as though he was about to break at any moment, and Mitsuki had to tread carefully or else he would crack under pressure. She was tired of his one-word answers and hidden feelings. She was his mother, god damn it. "What are we doing?" Mitsuki had asked Masaru one day. It was a question to which no answer could be found. They had no idea what they were doing or what their son needed, and so Mitsuki made the decision to confront him about her feelings and his. Katsuki had entered his house expecting it to be how it always is, quiet and desolate. However, he didn't expect to see his mother standing in front of him, nor his dad cowering behind her. His mother had a somewhat frustrated expression on her face, but he pushed past her and walked into the kitchen before grabbing a glass of water and making his way to his room. "Get back here, Katsuki," Mitsuki said in a dangerous voice. The way she said made it seem as though the alternative would end badly. Katsuki, being somewhat respectful and also maybe a bit wearied, walked back to where mother and father stood near the door. "I'd like have a talk," Mitsuki continued. Katsuki gave a small nod before looking towards Deku, who gave a half-reassuring smile and worried look. To that, Katsuki rolled his eyes. The nerd didn't need to feel worried about him. "Things are getting worse." Mitsuki sighed. "You cling to Deku as if he's the single thing in the universe worthy enough. I get that you're hurting, but Katsuki, we want our son back. Deku's dead. He's been dead for a few years now. Nothing's going to change that. Except for the fact that he's standing right fucking next to me." Katsuki glared. This conversation wouldn't be a good one, he could already tell. And it's one he wouldn't lose. "Kaken, you can't win a conversation?" Deku mumbled, trying to lighten the mood, but it only caused Katsuki to roll his eyes again. "He's not. Get it through your thick skull, Katsuki. Deku is dead. He's not actually standing next to you, okay?" Mitsuki had lost it. She was angry. "What your mother is trying to say is that we want you to be okay, and not subject to the voices coming at you," Masaru Softy said, trying to appeal to Katsuki in a friendlier way than Mitsuki had. "You make it sound like Deku is a disease. Fucking stop. I don't want your help, just stop." Katsuki yelled as tears started forming in his eyes. "We don't want to hurt you. It's a bit fucking late for that. Oh, stop it already. We're done, Katsuki. We're tired of your petty act and how you don't even respond to us anymore. You're a whole new person because of Deku's death. Inko is fine." Katsuki visibly flinched at the name. Inko's heartbroken, but she's moved on with her life. "You're the only one who can't fucking get over it. You don't understand it." Katsuki looked down as tears threatened to fall. "You're right, I don't. You and Izuku hardly got along. Why do you care so much about him?" Mitsuki asked as tears formed in her own eyes. Katsuki's breathing got heavier and he felt blood pound in his ears. His heart seemed to thud in his chest as he found it harder to breathe. He felt like a leaf as his hands shook and his vision blurred. He couldn't. Tears spilled down his cheeks as he fell to his knees, sobbing. Katsuki felt as though he was being strangled. He couldn't breathe properly and he felt sick to his stomach. Images kept flashing in his head of Deku. Deku smiling and jumping after learning about Katsuki's quirk. The look of pure fear on his face as Katsuki used his quirk against him for the first time. Deku looking dejected and empty. Deku's mangled body covered in blood. Katsuki couldn't take it anymore. The nausea he had felt in his stomach grew and rose to his throat as he bent over and threw up on the floor. There was too much happening. "Masaru, do something," Mitsuki called out in a panic. Masaru looked terrified as his son looked panicked and destroyed. "Katsuki, can you hear us?" Masaru tried, but he didn't know what to do. Katsuki wasn't responding and he was scared. They both were. Thoughts began swimming in Katsuki's head and the images wouldn't stop. Neither would the tears that fell on the floor. Katsuki couldn't see properly and his windpipes felt like they were being crushed. He was scared. As Katsuki screamed out in anguish and threw up bile, a bright light filled the room. One the family hadn't seen for years. The glass containing water in Katsuki's hand was shattered by the force of the explosion from Katsuki's hands. The glass flew everywhere and most of it fell on the floor, but a piece or two embedded in Katsuki's skin. But he didn't notice. He brought his hands up to cover his ears as he kept sobbing. There was a ringing in his ears that wouldn't go away. "Breathe, Kaken." Deku spoke softly, in and out, just like that. Katsuki closed his eyes and followed Deku's instructions until he felt calmer. The sobs slowed and Katsuki didn't feel so sick to his stomach as he tried to picture his happier moments as he ignored his parents. When he opened his eyes he saw a disaster. There was puke and bile all around Katsuki, with glass shards sprinkled over it and the water that didn't get evaporated. His parents were staring at him shell-shocked. They had never experienced this before. Katsuki felt like hours had just passed, but he knew it could only be a few minutes. It was quiet for a few seconds before everything hit Katsuki. His eyes widened as he stood up and ran to his room as fast as he could, locking the door. Katsuki put his face in his hands as he breathed heavily and paced around his room. I can't believe I fucking used my quirk. He looked down, almost seeming to be broken. It's alright, Kaken, you'll be okay. Deku smiled at him. It's not. Katsuki was crying now as he breathed in and out like Deku had told him earlier. Katsuki sat on his bed and started to cry into his arms as he curled into a ball. After a moment of silence, a quiet voice spoke. Please don't leave me, Izuku. It was so faint that later Katsuki would deny ever having said it, but at the moment he was vulnerable. Deku smiled as he sat next to Katsuki reassuringly. Never. The two sat next to each other for the next few hours, enjoying each other's company as negative thoughts swirled through the air. But Deku was there to keep those thoughts from reaching Katsuki. The ringing in his ears finally stopped. After Katsuki fled upstairs, Mitsuki looked at the floor. She knew she had to clean up the vomit, bile, and glass. But right now she was shocked in horror. What did we just do? Mitsuki asked Masaru as she felt her tears fall down her face. That night the household was split in half. 2 weeks later. Today was the day that Katsuki would receive his results from UA. He knew he made it into the general studies, of course, it wasn't that hard. But he still wanted to see if he was the top student. Hey, Katsuki, you got mail from you. Masaru smiled gently to his son as he stood in front of the door to his room. But it was back to treating Katsuki like a piece of porcelain, though Mitsuki had treated him better than before. Although, the interactions between him and his parents had decreased after his panic attack, as the internet called it. They had said hurtful things to Katsuki, and they were all stubborn bastards, so no apologies were going to take place. Katsuki grunted as he took the envelope from his father. Masaru frowned slightly, but walked away, leaving Katsuki to himself. Open it. Deku squealed excitedly. Alright. Katsuki broke the seal on the envelope before reaching in and grabbing the letter. He read it out loud for Deku. Dear Bakugou Katsuki, we are proud to say you have passed with flying colors and are accepted into the Department of General Studies at Udata High School. On the first day of school, you are to report to Class 1C for homeroom. There you will receive your schedule for the year. You performed extremely well, and we're happy to say this is your high school. Best of wishes. Principal Nizu of Udata High School. Kaken. You did it. Deku smiled widely as he hopped up and down in excitement. Yeah, of course I did. Katsuki smirked proudly. Although, the victory was short-lived when Deku brought up a problem with him going to UA. They know your quirk, Kaken. We need a way to communicate so it's not too weird for you to speak to me. Deku was concerned with this matter. Good point. Think it over. I'm going to grab dinner. I'll be back. Deku nodded in response. Katsuki walked to the kitchen where a plate was set out for him. So, what are the results? Mitsuki asked her son when he walked into the kitchen to retrieve his dinner. He hadn't eaten dinner with the rest of the family in a very long time. I got in. Congrats. Mitsuki smiled as Katsuki gave her a nod and took his plate with him to his room. She would get him to open up, it was just a matter of time. She had to save her son. Katsuki sat down and started to nibble on his meal while Deku mumbled. It was a bit calming, but Katsuki would never admit that. I got it. Deku exclaimed, surprising Katsuki as he jumped up in his chair and dropped his chopsticks. What? Sign language? Deku said, feeling proud of himself. If you make hand gestures, people will write you off as weird, but not crazy. Fine. I'll try it. Katsuki grumbled as he started his research on sign language and how to learn it before he attended UA. After all, the summer break wasn't over yet. They would make it through the year, together. No matter how much people want to tear them apart, he wouldn't let them. He couldn't lose his best friend twice. No scratch that he couldn't lose his brother twice. We got this. Deku cheered as he flashed Katsuki a very bright smile. Panic attacks be damned, he had the brightest star in the universe. Yeah. Katsuki agreed. They could do it. Together. Katsuki and Deku had studied hard for this moment. They even took it upon themselves to learn sign language, or at least as much as they could with the time they had. They had even practiced in public places, and for the most part, he only got the occasional odd look compared to how it used to be. Katsuki rarely did anything soft, especially in speech. And a kid yelling at air would be suspicious. Compared to sign language, it would just seem odd if Katsuki were signing in the air, not insane. Although, Katsuki was nowhere close to mastering sign language, as frustrating as it was. He didn't have enough time to get into the more complex word theory, and he couldn't sign super fast, but he knew the basics enough due to his constant practicing. Even though Katsuki had gotten into UA already, he was diligent in his studies. If he was to crush his competition, he had to stick to his studies. Deku kept trying to convince Katsuki to include quirk training in his studies, but Katsuki disagreed every time. He didn't trust it enough. Plus, he was doing things as Deku would have had to do because he never had a quirk. It was the very first day of school at Udata High School and Katsuki was anxious. He didn't care about the academics or his classmates. Instead, he was panicked about sharing his quirk or someone thinking he's insane. "Come here please," Mitsuki called from the other room. It must have been something urgent because they seldom talked to one another. Katsuki grunted as he made his way to his mother. "Look, it may not seem like it, however we're very proud of how far you've gotten. And we wish you luck." Masaru smiled at his son, who had an indifferent expression on his face. "I know this is a hard topic, but I've been keeping Inko updated about how you're doing because she's curious, and today she dropped off some cookies for you." Mitsuki handed Katsuki a place with a stack of cookies on it and a post-it note reading, "Go Katsuki. We're proud of you." Katsuki stared shocked at the cookies. Why had Inko done this? He didn't deserve her kindness. His aunt should have known better than to do this for him. As if sensing Katsuki's inner turmoil, Mitsuki added, "This hasn't been easy for Inko either. Kid, take the cookies and go visit her soon. She needs it." Katsuki gently took the plate in his shaking hands. Why would she need him to visit her? He wrecked her life, her treasure. "Thanks," Katsuki stuttered out, visibly shaken. "Don't thank us. Go visit her, it would really mean a lot." Katsuki breathed in and out, nodding his head. He didn't want to visit her. It would hurt him as much as it would hurt her, but Deku really wanted to. And Mitsuki had said that Inko needed it, and he didn't want to make her suffer. It would be hard, but he should do it, if he found the time with school starting. "Sorry to dump all of this on you on your first day of school." Katsuki got the feeling Mitsuki wasn't that sorry, but what did it matter? Just more added stress on his first day. Katsuki nodded at his mother and father before grabbing his backpack and leaving his house. For the entire trip to Udata High School, Katsuki silently mulled over his parents' words. Deku had been trying to get him to visit Inko forever, and so had his parents. But did she want him to visit? He didn't know what to do, but he didn't want to regret anything. Regret was horrible. Katsuki felt it every single day of his life. And if he wasn't careful, it would eat him away. What he wasn't aware of is that it already did. Katsuki sighed, deciding to think this over later because right now he had to focus on high school, and his worries about Inko would only absorb all of his attention. "Sorry," Katsuki signed to Deku. He felt as though he owed it to him. Deku just offered him an odd look. It was a worried look. Katsuki glared at the nerd, communicating that there was no reason to worry about him. He knew what he was doing. Katsuki found himself in front of the Udata High School, famously known for churning out heroes and training the smartest minds in each industry. Katsuki took a deep breath before walking up the stairs to his new high school. A person had whisked by Katsuki and he could feel a breeze by him as a kid ran up the steps, carrying a skateboard in their hand. "Sorry about that, dude," the person exclaimed, glancing back at Katsuki's angry expression. The extra who almost slammed into Katsuki had annoying bright yellow hair with a strange black lightning bolt either clipped or dyed into the hair. They wore a rumpled uniform. This idiot was a student in his fucking school. Katsuki could only assume this loser thought he was better than him and didn't slam into him to show their superiority to Katsuki. If every student was like this, he knew he was going to go insane at UA. So, in response, Katsuki just flipped the person off, who was busy climbing up the stairs, and didn't notice the string of profanities that Katsuki let loose. That dumb ass would regret making Katsuki his enemy. You don't even know him, Kaken. How can he be an enemy already? Deku laughed at his friend's antics. Shut up, shitty nerd, Katsuki grumbled. Give everyone a chance, at least for me. Deku attempted to give Katsuki puppy dog eyes, please. Fine. Katsuki grunted, but no, those eyes do shit. Deku smiled and pumped his fist in success. Katsuki looked around, and saw that although there weren't many students around, they were looking at him strangely. His quiet speaking was clearly not as quiet as he intended. Katsuki just glared at the students around him, and started to go up the stairs. Katsuki walked down the halls of Yude, taking it all in. The doors were almost all humongous in case of a student or teacher will a quirk which increased their body size, but it was still an odd sight to see. Katsuki passed classes 1A and 1B with a sneer on his face. Most of the kids there were shitty extras not even worth his time, anyways. Class 1C, yet again, had a giant door, however something about it seemed less glamorous than 1A and 1B, probably because the hero industry was seen as the diamond in a bag of coals. It was stupid, really, how annoying heroes could be. They were all so full of themselves and ignorant to anything that didn't affect them. All Might was Katsuki's favorite hero growing up, Deku's too. But now Katsuki wasn't fond of heroes. They dealt with the big things, the villain attacks, but they couldn't care less about the citizens who didn't seem to be in immense danger. If anyone had told Deku that he could become a hero, that he could do it, the situation would be different. Katsuki had realized that Deku was better than he could ever be, and while he hated it, the truth was undeniable. Deku stood up for what was right, not what would benefit him the most. After his attempted suicide, no one batted an eye. No heroes paid any attention to the small quirkless boy. And while Katsuki knew it was all his fault, he still held a grudge against heroes, for the most part. All while Deku admired every single last one of them, appreciating them for their unique quirks and fighting styles. Heroes had done a lot of things for society. They saved people, inspired confidence and hope, whatever. But they assured a false sense of security. Everyone was so confident in their heroes that they knew nothing bad would ever happen to them. It was pathetic. Katsuki wasn't saying that heroes should be removed, don't get him wrong, they saved people and inspired courage and all that. Bullshit. But now people assumed they would get saved at any win. Katsuki knew better than to assume that. After all, Deku never got saved. Katsuki shook his head to clear it of those thoughts. They didn't matter. He was going to general studies and graduate as top of his class. Then he'd get an occupation even better than in the hero field. A paramedic maybe? Police officer? Surgeon? Who knows what the future will hold, but standing there would achieve nothing. Katsuki and Deku nodded at each other before Katsuki walked into Class 1C. The Class 1C classroom was relatively empty. There were only 2 students already occupying seats, and they both seemed too nervous to notice Katsuki's entrance. Kaken, this is so cool. You're going to school at U.A. The U.A. High School. It's legendary. This school is one of the hardest to get into, hero program or not. I'm so proud. Did you know that U.A. was originally built to dash? Deku started to mumble. It seemed as though the full weight of attending the school hadn't quite hit Deku yet, but now excited him fully, to the point where he let loose one of his infamous paragraph-long fanboy mumbles. Katsuki rolled his eyes at his friend's antics, but found himself slightly raising his lips in a subtle smile. The seats were organized alphabetically by family name, so Katsuki found his seat near the front of the classroom. He still had about 10 minutes until the start of homeroom, and he exchanged a few signs with Deku, who was filled with joy and excitement at the prospect of being at the school. Katsuki hadn't noticed at first, but he was beginning to see that more and more students had shuffled into the classroom. He offered little more than a small glance to each student. He wasn't here to make any friends. The classroom opened once more, this time with heavier footsteps behind the door and a stronger push. The person who walked in offered quite a unique sight. He was completely made of cement, made up from head to toe of solid material. He had a blocky body contained within a sleeveless brown suit. The hero had his eyes almost closed, as if they were slits, and a large mouth pulled upwards. The pro-hero Cementos stood at the front of the room. Is he your homeroom teacher? Cementos is so cool. He can manipulate cement both wet and dry, and he has a large distance from where he can use his quirk, not to mention how much of a strong fighter he is and how he's so useful in rescue. He's saved so many people using his quirk. He just needs contact with the cement to utilize his quirk, and it's an emitter type. Deku's mumblings seemed to have no end, and as annoying as it was hearing the stupid need speak, it offered interesting information. Hello, students. My name is Cementos. I will be your homeroom teacher. Cementos spoke out to the classroom in a calm voice. We are going to go to the opening ceremony for the first years. His words were short and to the point. Katsuki could respect that. Cementos checked to see if everyone was there, which was a waste of time according to Katsuki. Afterwards, they all got up and followed Cementos to the orientation. Katsuki could hear the whispers of his peers near him, but he just scoffed. For the opening ceremony, or orientation, each class was to stand with each other in an orderly fashion. The principal and staff members stood up on a stage visible to all of the students. Looking around, Katsuki noticed that Class 1A was nowhere to be found. Pricks. They thought they were better than everyone, and so they didn't have to attend the opening ceremony? Katsuki would show them. A small mouse bear-like creature stepped forward. He was small, and had a pink scar running across his small face. He had stepped up to the microphone in his tailored suit and began his speech. This was the all-intelligent Principal Nizu. Students, welcome to Udata High School. We are overjoyed to have you here at our school, and we hope that you have a wonderful few years here. We hope you find your stay accommodating, and we open you with wide arms into our community. We have pro-heroes teaching most of our classes, so don't try anything funny, and our security is active all hours of the day. We are glad you all chose Udata as your high school, and we are all very excited to see your growth. Now, on to a few words from the top-ranking student in each class. Starting from Class 1K as per usual, Katsuki noticed that somewhere along the speech Principal Nizu had sent an underlying threat to any who dared oppose him. He may seem an animal, but he was smarter than almost any human being. The top-ranking student from Class 1K went on stage to give a few words to the other classes. It's amazing to be here. It truly is. Udata is known as the best in Japan, so I'm glad to be here. Management is no joke. However, being in the hero class would have been more than ideal. Katsuki scoffed at the student who gave a few more words. The next student, from Class 1J, gave a very similar speech, as did all the students from Classes 1E, F, G, D and I. It frustrated Katsuki to know and to see all these students longing to get into the hero course, unsatisfied by the cards they've been given and have chosen already. The top student of Class 1H, however, a girl whose name Katsuki hadn't cared enough to remember, had an odd speech, but it was refreshing because she expressed no interest in joining the hero courses and instead seemed content with where she was, gaining a speck of Katsuki's respect. She had walked up to the stage with bouncing shoulder-length pink dreadlocks. She was reasonably short, but held a mature build. Her eyes were a strange yellow color with a cross in the center of her irises, making them look a bit like scope lenses. Perched atop her head lay red and gold steampunk goggles. It was safe to assume she was part of the support course. "Hello," she exclaimed happily, "I'm so excited to make babies for everyone. And to be recruited for them." Everyone looked at her as if she were crazy. Babies? However, when she started explaining one of her babies, effectively turning her welcoming words into an advertisement, it was obvious that by babies she meant her inventions. After a few minutes, she had to be ushered off the stage due to her taking up too much time. Katsuki was called up to speak for Class 1C because he obviously had the highest score. "Don't be rude, Kaken," Deku warned, as if he could foresee his best friend saying something that would piss off most students in that hall. His assumption was correct. Katsuki went up to the stage before beginning his speech. "You're all idiots." Deku knew he was screwed. Seriously. It's as if hero courses are the only thing at this fucking school. You're in this school because you have potential. You extras are wasting it all by wishing for something you'll never have. So get your fucking act together. Or not. It's all the same for me. I'm going to be the best, and I won't settle for anything less. Katsuki looked at the audience, seeing the enraged faces of his peers. Well, everyone was awash with silence before the protests began. People weren't pleased with what Katsuki had to say, probably because it was the truth. Students, please calm down, we have one more class to go, and then you'll all return to your homerooms and begin your days. Katsuki could almost swear he saw an amused glint in the principal's eyes as he attempted to calm down the aggravated crowd. Think you're better than us? We'll show you hero material. Loser. I bet. He's real weak. Katsuki clenched his fists, repeated the mantras in his head as he walked right back to where he was standing before. The nervous faces of his classmates had turned into something unpleasant aimed at Katsuki. He got sneers and glares, but it wasn't the first time. Kaken, you told the truth. But it wasn't your job to do it, no one was ready to hear it. Deku sadly shook his head. I know, nerd. I know, Katsuki murmured as he saw the top-ranking student from Class 1B step up to the podium and talk. The girl had waist-length green hair made up from what seemed to be vines. A strand seemed to be wrapped around her forehead multiple times. She had medium height and dark green eyes. Hello, she spoke softly, it is a wonder being here. Katsuki pretty much zoned out the rest of her speech, but she seemed a bit odd as she had mentions of things that were cast in a more religious light. With that, Principal Nizu spoke a few more words, dismissing the classes, thus ended the opening ceremony. Before Katsuki had a chance to walk back to his homeroom, he was stopped. It was by the Class 1B girl. Your speech made sense, thank you, she said to him in a kindly manner. To you, of course it would. You want less dumb asses in your class. Katsuki sneered before walking away from the girl. Kaken, she was trying to be nice. You could have been friends. Deku exclaimed, clearly unhappy about Katsuki's attitude. I'm not here to make friends. The tone of Katsuki's voice was a warning, one that shut Deku up. The rest of the day wasn't too pleasant. Most of the students left him alone, for fear of what his quirk might be, seeing as it wasn't a topic which had been brought up in the classroom yet. Although, Katsuki still got pushed around a few times, and there were constant whispers and glares sent his way. At lunch he ate alone. But that was okay. He wasn't truly alone. He couldn't communicate with Deku too well with sign, but they had a decent conversation regardless. Deku was of course frustrated at Katsuki's lack of care for friendships and building relationships as he progressed in high school. He could have already had a friend in that girl who didn't mind his speech. He also wasn't pleased with Katsuki's speech during the opening ceremony. It was too harsh, and because of it he probably made enemies out of half the school. Katsuki knew he'd fucked up. He didn't take back what he said, but he still knew it wasn't time to say them. Because of it he fucked everything up for himself. He always did. Every time he got involved it all went to hell. Deku reminded him of that every day. Whether with what he symbolized or what he said. It was always his fault no matter what. He regretted all so badly that he didn't know what to do anymore. He hated it so much. He hated how he couldn't do anything right. He hated it, and everyone hated him now. Including himself. After all, why shouldn't he? If anyone saw a tear slide down Katsuki's cheek, they didn't say anything. Who would care for what he felt? Katsuki didn't notice as a tear slid down the face of someone who did care for him, and had no idea how to help. Deku swore he would do what he could for Katsuki. Dead or alive. That night, Katsuki didn't sleep at all. Replaying the harsh words he all too well knew to be true. Academically wise, the first week of school was pathetic. It was all introductions to the teachers and the subjects themselves. One frustrating aspect was art history, taught by the sexualized teacher Midnight. She wore a rather inappropriate outfit, and while her attitude was fine, although at times a bit disgusting, there were always a few boys and girls drooling over her during class. Katsuki preferred a better learning environment than one of lust. The rest of the classes seemed to be a tad challenging, but he knew that he would enjoy it nonetheless, and of course prove his #1 spot. The week overall hadn't gone well for Katsuki. He was swallowed by the glaring looks sent his way and how Deku's disappointment rung over and over again in his head. giving ammunition to hit his already broken confidence and ego. Deku wasn't one to keep grudges, but Katsuki was, which gave him no benefit. He sat alone at lunch, not that he minded. Deku liked to talk his ears off about anything, and Katsuki would begrudgingly listen. During the second week things started to grow worse. Katsuki had walked into class on the first day of the week, both haggard and tired. He couldn't sleep, and when he did manage to, he drifted into a nightmare. Plagued by it, he woke up in a sweat and had trouble sleeping again. He had ignored his parents, wishing him a good day, and the usual jeers from other students. He promptly sat in his seat and spaced out. "Hello," Cementos said after he walked into the room with quiet students for homeroom. "It has been decided that for homeroom today there will be some bonding activities." The class broke out in whispers about what the bonding moments could be, but Katsuki just grimaced. "Go around the room and say what your quirk is and one fun fact about yourself." Katsuki knew he was fucked. "Kaken, will you be alright?" Deku was worried, and Katsuki hated the pity. "I'm not weak," Katsuki signed. "I don't want the pity. I'm not trying to pity you, I'm worried." "It'll be fine. I know." Deku smiled at Katsuki to show his support. As each student went around the room they said their quirk and a fun fact about themselves. None of them were particularly unique at all, and their interests were all very shallow. "And my quirk is brainwashing." The class grew silent. One student, with purple hair spiking up and dark bags under his eyes had spoken, and the class wasn't ready for his response. "And I like cats." Katsuki had to crack a half smile at that. With the class's reaction, it became clear what their thoughts were. Thoughts Cementos picked up on. "Quirk discrimination in my classroom, or any classroom, will not be tolerated, so I suggest you stop that now." Katsuki could see the boy's face grow into a small smile. Katsuki knew bullies. After all, he was one, and he could tell this kid was a target. Knowing that made him feel full of dread and regret. Before he knew it, it was his turn. He knew if he didn't say his quirk people would assume the worst and look down on him, but it was too painful to say it and see the reactions on the faces of his classmates. "Kaken, I know. Just say you sweat nitroglycerin. It's not the full truth, but it's not a lie," Deku whispered to Katsuki. "Not a bad idea. I like hiking," Katsuki grunted. It took his mind off of things. "And I can sweat nitroglycerin." Cementos seemed to frown a bit at his answer, but the class looked at him oddly before a few kids straight up laughed. "What's that?" one kid asked. "Nitroglycerin is a chemical, it's highly flammable," Cementos answered, looking at Katsuki with newfound curiosity. "So he's a walking bomb?" Another kid snorted as if he were making fun of Katsuki. "Yeah," Katsuki murmured. It was a little too close to the truth, but not that far off. "Isn't that super dangerous?" "He's a walking bomb. Can't he explode any moment?" "I can't believe it. What a pathetic quirk. He's a danger to everyone." Katsuki knew all the students' words were true, but that didn't make them hurt any less. "Enough." Cementos quieted the whispers. "Here at UA we don't discriminate against quirks, at all. You can trust us to take the proper security measures for each student." Katsuki frowned. The students had stopped their whispers, but the impact already hit Katsuki. The one kid not insulting him, or saying anything, was the weird purple-haired kid. Probably had something to do with his past experiences in bullying. "Kaken, don't listen to them. You're amazing and you've grown so much." Katsuki gave a slight nod to Deku, who was trying to cheer him up, as per usual. It made him feel guilty, although there was nothing he could do. The bonding exercise finished, and Katsuki went through all the rest of the classes before lunch almost in a trance. He was thinking and criticizing himself too hard, as he tended to do. By lunchtime, Katsuki felt exhausted, and after getting his food, which he brought from home, he went to sit at his usual table, but Deku had other plans. "Why don't you sit with Shinso?" "Who?" "The guy with purple hair." "Well, I don't know him. He seemed to be nice and didn't insult you. Doesn't mean he'd like my company. Would you like his?" "No." "Come on, Kaken. You'll make friends and feel less lonely. I have you. We both know that won't replace friends. You can't even really talk to me." "Please, Kaken." "No. If you don't like him, then I'll let it go, but you should at least try. Please. Fine. Thank you. Whatever. Katsuki spotted the purple-haired kid with eye bags sitting at a table by himself. He started to walk over to him, sighing as he frowned. Of course, the shitty need would force him into a situation like this. Katsuki sat down at the table across from the students. The purple-haired kid only raised his eyebrows at Katsuki's entrance. They sat in silence for a bit, with Katsuki wincing, knowing this was a terrible idea. Hiking, huh? Katsuki whipped his head up to see the kid looking at him expectantly. Why do you ask? Just trying to make conversation? Katsuki winced again. Of course his personality would make this all fail. Do you have any cats? Katsuki asked, trying to repair his mistake. Oh, yeah. I have 2. The kid seemed to perk up at the question. What kind are they? I'm not too sure. They were rescue, but one looks like a calico. Got any pets? The kid asked. No. There were a few seconds of awkward silence, where the purple-haired boy had no idea what to say. That speech you gave sucked. Katsuki knew that was coming. I don't give a flying fuck what you thought. It was true. Aren't you a little bastard? Asshole. Insulting me gets you nowhere. Katsuki rolled his eyes, and could see Deku watching the conversation with amusement. Oh, fuck off, eyebags. Eyebags? That's new. Katsuki flipped off the purple-haired student, now dubbed eyebags. They sat in more silence for a bit, but in that time a bell went off, signaling the end of lunch. That's how you make conversation. Katsuki gave eyebags a slight nod and then they both walked off. Not before Katsuki caught an eye roll aimed at him, but he just smirked in return. I'm so proud, Kaken. I'm glad you made a friend. I wouldn't call him that. Deku just gave Katsuki a big smile. He seemed almost giddy. At homeroom the next day, Cementos had an important announcement. We must choose a class president and vice president. You will vote for who you think will be best, and there is no voting for yourself. Katsuki knew there was no way he would be able to be class president. He decided to vote for eyebags. He hadn't made insulted Katsuki when everyone else in the class did. He also didn't know any other student to vote for. At the end, Cementos counted up the votes. 2 extras, who Katsuki couldn't care enough to remember the names of, became the president and vice president. Unsurprisingly, Katsuki got no votes. Eyebags seemed surprised when he saw he had received a vote, so good for him. You didn't get a vote, Deku said sadly, but you'll always be a winner to me. Katsuki snorted. The nerd could be dramatic, but he had a way of cheering Katsuki up a little. Although Katsuki knew he didn't deserve Deku's kindness or compassion, Katsuki should not be a winner in Deku's eyes. The rest of the classes went by normally with Katsuki taking his usual excellent notes. One time, when they were younger, Deku caught the cold and Katsuki had to teach him what he missed in class, but his notes were really what had caught Deku back up to speed. At lunchtime, Katsuki sat at his own table. He felt that sitting at Eyebag's table would be awkward and that he wasn't particularly wanted there. He started to eat his food, and he saw Eyebags approach his table and then sit down across from him. Katsuki felt his eyes widen before giving Eyebags a slight nod. They sat in silence for a bit. This time it wasn't as awkward as it had been the previous day. Do you bring your own lunches? Nice of your mom to make lunch for you. She doesn't. Katsuki snorts before rolling his eyes. Your dad? I make them. Demis. Katsuki crossed his arms. Really? That's cool. You can cook? Where did you dash? A siren started to go off, and all the students in the lunch hall started to panic like crazy. They were knocking other students down. Katsuki was very confused. There's been a breach in security. Katsuki heard a student tell their friend, and he understood why all the panicking took place. Eyebags and him started to get up, but as they got swept up in the chaos, a student from Katsuki's class screamed out. Everyone stopped after hearing the scream. Move! He screamed and cut through the crowd towards Katsuki. He started pushing kids away from Katsuki until he was in a little bubble of emptiness in the crowd. He could blow up? The student explained. Fucking shut up. I know my quirk better than your puny brain knows yours. Katsuki roared at the student who thought Katsuki was going to blow up because of a student accidentally causing a spark or something. Students, another voice cried out from the top of the door, which students were trying to escape from. The holder of the voice was clinging to the exit sign. It is only the press, there is no need for panic. The students started to murmur at this message. Before on the intercom a similar message was given. There is no need to panic, please go back to your tables calmly and continue in your lunch. We are investigating this, however there is no need for panic. The students started to whisper among themselves before throwing Katsuki an odd look and walking back to their tables to continue lunch. Katsuki and Ibags sat in silence after that, both thinking over things. Deku's frown hadn't gone unnoticed by Katsuki, however, but he decided not to press. For the rest of the day everyone seemed to be on edge and a bit jumpy. The teachers decided not to subject their students to anything too harsh, seeing as all of them were a bit out of it. The students also seemed wary of Katsuki. During the security breach, it seemed as though he was going to explode, like he was a bomb placed in the school. When, in reality, Katsuki had way more control over his quirk. After all, he had been training it from kindergarten to junior high school. He knew he wasn't a bomb. That wasn't how it worked. He might be hurt, yes, but he wouldn't damage anything too much except himself. Not that he'd care to ever use his quirk or find out. Explosions even frightened him now. Deku was awfully quiet the rest of the day, and he had his thinking face on. Once Katsuki got home and got ready for bed, he considered asking Deku about it, but decided to give him time to think it through because he didn't have a place in solving Deku's problems, when he was the cause of so many. Katsuki didn't sleep too well that night, but what he didn't notice was that Deku wasn't in his room as per usual. Deku was gone. The next morning after Katsuki had woken up, he saw Deku looking right at him with a crinkled brow and a very serious demeanor. Katsuki felt tired and drowsy, but what Deku said made him perk up immediately, and he no longer felt tired. There's going to be an attack on Class 1A by a group of villains. We need to warn them. When Izuku heard that the press were the ones to breach security, he was confused. He knew they were desperate, but that desperate? While Kaken was occupied and going back to his table with Shinso, Izuku decided to go look at the crime scene. He saw the door, now disintegrated and decayed in a pile of dust. Izuku knew this couldn't have been the press or the media. He went back to where Katsuki was and started his thinking. Izuku was wondering about all of the logistics, taking into account the time of the day, security cameras in the area, witnesses, and of course suspects. The media was low on his list, but still very possible, just unlikely in Izuku's eyes. It could have been villains, and that scared Izuku. He remembered Kaken being attacked by a villain, and he could do nothing. Kaken almost died that day, and no one would save him until All Might stepped in. Izuku vowed to never get Kaken in that kind of danger again. He already was hurting, and he didn't need anything to make it worse. Although Kaken had gotten better over the years, he was still as regretful, sad, and angry as he was before. He was selfless, in the way that he thought he deserved anything bad that was thrown at him, so he'd throw himself at things to help people in the process. Kaken worried Izuku, so he did what he could to relieve him of his worries. He didn't pity him or think of him as weak, and Kaken needed to learn the difference. He also needed to learn that Izuku had forgiven him long ago. In the years he spent with him, he knows Kaken isn't lacking character or drive. He just had a complex from years of pressure put on him. That doesn't excuse his actions, but what he's done since the accident has proven to Izuku that he's deserving of forgiveness. Izuku could tell that each of Kaken's classmates' remarks about him or his quirk hurt a lot. At their old school he would be left alone, but here no one knew the true nature of his quirk and Izuku didn't know how Kaken would fare with that, but he'd support him regardless and help him get through it. Once Kaken went to sleep, Izuku left the house. It was customary at least once every 2 weeks for him to leave the Bakugou residence and meet up with an old friend. She was a knowledgeable woman, one who held a certain amount of power in her prowess. She was fairly tall and held sharp, intelligent eyes. Her hair was long and dark, half of it held up in a bun and the other half flowing down. The hairstyle was reminiscent to that of Midoriya Inko's hair. They had met as an accident, after Izuku had gotten into a fight with Kaken, and the woman was accommodating and perceptive. She was also dead. Hence why her and Izuku could see each other. She became an outlet for Izuku, and vice versa. Although, she was not a teenage boy and therefore she didn't feel the need to vent about simple problems. However, she had made it her duty to watch over her problematic grandson, and she's told Izuku about him on multiple occasions. He sounded quite troubled and lost in life, and she wished she could guide him, but as the years progressed it seemed that he's gotten worse. When Izuku shows up at their meeting spot, her smile is fainter than usual and looks a bit sadder, as if she had grim news. "Hello, Izuku." "Hi. How are you doing?" "Fine. However, every time I think Kaken may be getting better and gaining more confidence, like his old self, he seems to get worse." Izuku sighs before sitting next to the woman. Not as bad as he was when it all began. She had a frown. If anyone was his motherly figure, it would be her, and she seemed to care a lot about him too. No, not as bad, which is good, I suppose. They sat in silence for a second, sitting side by side in a quiet peace, before Izuku remembers his manners. How are you doing?" "That's a bit complicated," the woman frowns, and Izuku whips his head towards her. He'd never really seen her like this before. "How so?" "Your Kaken goes to UA, right?" "Yeah, in the general studies." "Good. I don't know exactly how to say this." The woman seemed at a loss for words, and Izuku was confused as to what she was saying. He felt himself starting to mumble before he could stop himself about all the possibilities. The woman smiled sadly at him in an endearing way, before silencing his mumbles with her next words. "My grandson has gotten worse." Izuku felt his brow furrow. "He's fallen in with someone who has hurt me very much. He's joined a group of villains." Izuku gasped. He didn't know her grandson was shunned so badly that he felt the need to join villains. By the age of 4, after being declared quirkless, Izuku knew not everyone was born equal. Or at least, at age 4 not everyone was equal. He could understand why villainy might appease to someone like the woman's grandson, however he had hoped it wasn't true, and that he could make it through. Like Shinso had. He agreed with Kaken's assumption that the boy had been bullied, but villainy was another step entirely. And who would even want to hurt the woman? She was so kind and insightful. Why had her grandson joined up with whoever did this? The woman continued speaking, and she tripped over her words a few times as if the message were so important she couldn't talk fast enough to get it all out. "They're planning an attack on UA's Class 1A. Izuku felt his eyes widen. The woman was choking on her words now, and tears streamed down her face. "They're trying to kill All Might? What? How? They have this creature they made who they hope will achieve it." "Made?" The woman nodded as she put her face in her hands, and Izuku let his thoughts race as he let a few more tears streak down her face, before explaining in more details about the attack, and how he could possibly stop, or at least provide insight for it. Class 1A is going to the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ, and there will be an ambush where my grandson will conduct an attack with hundreds of other villains, and attempt to make their point across and kill All Might. My grandson has a villain working close with him, who can warp people different places, and they will attempt to warp all the students different places with groups of villains in hopes to split them all up, and better execute their attacks then. Izuku stared in shock as the woman gave him all the details about the attack, and when it would take place. He had to warn Yuta, and warn Kaken about what was to take place or else there could be lives on the line. Kaken had a chance to save others, he just had to convince him to convince the UA staff. Izuku found himself crying as well. This was all so wrong. "I'm sorry to place such a burden on you, Izuku. We need to stop this." Izuku knew the woman had been a hero in her life, and a very good one at that. She had a real priority to save people, and Izuku respected that. Izuku respected her. "What quirk does your grandson have?" Izuku asked out of curiosity to prepare himself. "He can decay or disintegrate anything he touches with all 5 fingers." Izuku felt like the world just crashed down on him. Disintegration. UA security breach. The woman's grandson had lowered the UA security. If he doubted her before, he didn't now. He found all of his answers, and she had no idea that there was a UA security breach. Izuku filled her in on what happened at UA. She looked at him with wide, teary eyes. It started. Izuku and the woman sat together, both thinking things through and enjoying each other's company as no one else really saw them. "I should go now, but I'll tell Kaken about what you've learned." Izuku stood up. I know it's hard to watch someone go down the wrong path, and there's nothing to change that, but if you need to talk you know I'm here. You've already done so much for me. Thanks. Izuku smiled at the woman before he began to walk away. And Izuku? Izuku turned to look at the woman who offered a desperate and sad smile. Good luck, and don't forget to smile. You too, Nana. With that, Izuku made his way back to Kaken's house and waited for him to wake up before telling him the news. Shimura Nana could see the compassion Izuku held. He truly was an amazing kid, and she was glad they had become friends. She just hoped she hadn't placed her faith in the wrong person. There were lives at stake, but then again, she's placed her faith in another kid that reminded her about Izuku. She would have loved to see what kind of hero he would have become. A good one, for sure. Nana left the building. She met Izuku every 2 weeks, and decided to visit an old friend before returning to her grandson. He was really traveling down the wrong path, and it hurt Nana to know that. But warning Izuku and having him tell this Kaken was the best way to save people. Although it seemed a while before she had saved anyone, she knew she had saved Midoriya Izuku just as much as he had saved her. With that, Nana checked up on her successor. He had a frail appearance, but she knew his resolve was strong. She had chosen well. With all might and Izuku. What the fuck? We don't have much time, Kaken. Katsuki stared at Deku, who seemed to be very focused. Give me a minute. Deku nodded slowly. Katsuki started to get ready for school as fast as he could. He was very curious as to what in the hell Deku was talking about. Deku was looking around the room anxiously, and Katsuki wanted to know why he was so nervous. Katsuki crossed his arms before looking at Deku. Okay, now what the fuck? Deku seemed unfazed by Katsuki's raised voice and harsher tone. There's going to be an attack on Class 1A when they visit the USJ or unforeseen simulation joint. It's going to be done by a group of villains who are trying to kill All Might. Deku was very serious and determined. All clues pointed to him being serious, but Katsuki was still skeptical. So, we need to stop it. You can warn the teachers about it. Deku also seemed desperate. Katsuki was worried about what was going on, and if he was telling the truth, what did that mean? They won't believe me. I don't even know if I believe you. Katsuki sighed. Please, Kaken. Tears started to stream down Deku's face. Katsuki hated seeing him cry, but this matter was serious and he needed to be sure that this was real. How do you know? Katsuki asked. I can't. So you don't fucking trust me? It's not about you. Deku screeched as tears kept streaming down his face. When they were younger, Katsuki wondered if that was his quirk, to endlessly cry and have tear ducts that lasted forever. It wasn't often Deku had raised his voice, and Katsuki was always wary of pissing Deku off, because it wasn't pretty. I won't tell the teachers then, since you clearly don't care to tell me if you're telling the truth or not. Katsuki was angry. Deku won't tell him the truth? Fine. He wouldn't help him. Deku opened his mouth to speak as more tears flowed, but before he could, the door to Katsuki's room opened and his mother walked in. I heard yelling, are you okay? Fine. What's wrong? Deku. Katsuki could see his mother wince at the name. What about him? He doesn't trust me. Katsuki was wary about telling his mother anything, so he tried his best keeping it vague as possible or she would pester him about it, and that would be too annoying for him to handle. How so? He's not telling me the whole truth. I know you won't tell me anything else, but hear me out. Mitsuki sighed before sitting down on Katsuki's bed. Deku was watching their exchange nervously. Has he ever really done anything to deceive you? Katsuki flinched before thinking about it. He really didn't know. He just shrugged before he could think too deeply about it, and not be able to stop thinking. I'll take that as no. Katsuki, listen. This is never easy, but you have to trust him. He wouldn't tell you about it if he didn't trust you at all, or had no faith in you. I know the years haven't been easy on you, but if there's anyone that's been through it all with you, it's Izuku. He cares about you, and if he's not telling you the whole truth, it's not because he doesn't want to, it's probably because he isn't allowed to, or he wants to protect you. Katsuki opened his mouth to speak, but Mitsuki held up her hand. Let me finish. I'm not saying you need to be protected. I raised you and I know you are so strong and determined. But we all need help. We're very similar in our temperaments and I didn't let people help me for a very long time, mistaking it as pity. Pity is something entirely different, and I bet you Izuku doesn't pity you. He looks up to you and cares for you. No matter what you did to him, he trusts you now. Stop living in the past. It's easier said than done, but we both know you can do it. Mitsuki ruffled Katsuki's hair before standing up. Think about it, kid. She walked away, leaving Katsuki with Deku. She's not wrong. Katsuki looked up to see Deku's face. He was smiling sadly in a comforting way. A few tears streaked down his face, instead being happier tears. I love you. Katsuki felt himself tear up at Deku's words. It was easy to assume Deku hated him for everything that happened to him. You're my brother. Katsuki started to cry at the sentiment. Katsuki didn't know what to say. He couldn't stop living in the past, and he didn't know if he could ever learn not to. I love you too. They were brothers forever, no matter what. Katsuki and Deku started to cry together, this time with happy tears. What do you need me to do? Katsuki asked after a minute had passed. He still was unsure about Deku's information, but he needed to trust him, at least a little bit. Katsuki wiped his eyes as Deku started to give him a rundown on what to do. Of course, Katsuki had to convince them as well as he could. Mitsuki walked down the stairs with a smile on her face. She walked up to Masaru, who was prepping the food items Katsuki would put in his lunch. At first he was annoyed by it, but it cut down on time, so he was fine with it now. I take back what I said, Mitsuki said as she smiled at her husband. Which was, we didn't do anything wrong with Katsuki, he's just finding his way. Masaru smiled at Mitsuki before she started to make some tea. The two both made breakfast in silence. They both knew it wasn't going to be an easy path, but regardless they were proud of their son. Katsuki got to school early with a determined look on his face. Even if it was all a hoax, he couldn't risk it and neither could the teachers. Deku smiled at him encouragingly, and he nodded back. They could do this. Katsuki walked up to the staff room. They should all be there, seeing as class hadn't started yet. He gulped nervously. The staff room was something very daunting, however he had to get over his fears and knock on the door. Katsuki felt his breathing becoming a little frantic. I'll be alright, Kaken. Breathe in and out slowly. Katsuki listened to Deku's instructions. He took a few breaths, calming down his inner anxiety to a more manageable level. Katsuki mustered up enough confidence before knocking on the door. After a few moments, it opened to a thin man with blonde hair loosely hanging on his head. He seems to be swimming in fabric, as his yellow suit with a blue tie was a few sizes too big on him. His eyes portrayed hints of sadness and exhaustion, but his smile shined bright. Hello, young man. Is there anything I can help you with? Yes, I need to speak to the principal, it's urgent. Well then come on in. The man ushered Katsuki inside where he saw his teachers sitting on couches. There was a man with long choppy black hair and tired red eyes with prominent eye bags. They rivaled the ones eye bags had. He was slumped against the couch with a bored expression on his face. There was also a taller man with a larger bust and gray hair with yellow glasses covering his eyes, and a frown fixed on his face. Other than that, Katsuki knew almost all of the other teachers. Once he entered, all the teachers looked up in surprise at seeing Katsuki. Hello, little listener. Loudmouth smiled at Katsuki. What are you here for? Katsuki felt himself shake a little bit. Before steeling himself and taking a deep breath in. There will be an attack on Class 1A when they visit the USJ. All the teachers looked at him with wide, curious eyes. How do you know about that trip? Double Eyebags asked as he straightened his posture. I can't exactly say. But there will be an attack by a group of villains whose goals are to kill All Might. The teachers looked alarmed and started to look at one another in a worried manner. The principal calmly set down his cup of tea. You can't say your source? No, not exactly. However, they do have insight into this group of villains. Katsuki had no idea if Deku's informant really had this much insight, but he was hoping they did. Deku's nod confirmed that his assumption was correct. Really? Yes, I know their quirks and their plans. The principal looked at the staff and asked, what do you propose we do? You listen to what I have to say and then make the proper preparations. Katsuki answered for the teachers. What is their objective again? To kill All Might? How? Principal Nizu asked with a curious gaze. They've created something called a Nomu which has multiple quirks? How do we know this is the truth? Lust Lady seemed worried, but also skeptical. You don't, but are you fucking stupid enough to ignore it? The teachers all glanced at each other as if trying to communicate without having Katsuki there. What class are you in? Mine. Cementos spoke up as he looked at Katsuki with a critical eye. What's your quirk? Katsuki paused, he didn't want to say it. He swallowed and frowned a bit while crossing his arms to stop his visible shaking. Explosions? Cementos replied as if sensing Katsuki's uncomfort, although hearing the name of his quirk made him flinch as he winced. Principal Nizu put a paw on his chin. This is most curious. What do we do? Thin Guy asked. He had a complicated facial expression which seemed part worry, curiosity, and frustration. What are their quirks? Angry Geezer asked. He also seemed skeptical. The one executing the attack has a disintegration quirk. He can disintegrate anything if all 5 of his fingers are on it. His right-hand man has a warp quirk and can warp multiple people at a time. Katsuki recounts what Deku told him about the villains. They're planning on using a villain to jam any signals. And of course Nomu has a strength quirk and regeneration. The principal nodded. We'll come up with a plan of defense, then. Just in case. If the information is faulty, then we'll see about a punishment for false information. The teachers all nodded. He's coming with? Double Eyebags said, pointing at Katsuki. No thanks. I have my academics to get to, plus I don't want to spend my time with shitty hero students and their fucking attitudes. Double Eyebags raises his eyebrows at Katsuki's response. It wasn't a request or question, it was a statement. Putting another kid in danger, huh? Katsuki asked angrily. We'll see about that, Double Eyebags said, waving his hand with a bored expression. The listener brings up a good point, we can't drag him into a hero attack. Loudmouth almost looked concerned. That's not too heroic. Thin Guy agreed, looking down as he drifted off into though again. Tashinori, we'll be careful, Double Eyebags said with a glare sent in Thin Guy's direction. What a smart school. Katsuki murmured sarcastically. He never asked to come with in the midst of a villain attack. I think that's a fine idea. However, if any harm comes to him, it's our fault, Principal Nizu stated. Katsuki could tell he was curious if the attack was real or not, and to him, Katsuki being there wasn't too much of a real concern. What amazing school. Katsuki even saw Cementos giving the slightest nod of his head. A fucking course everyone agreed to go send off Katsuki to his death. It was his mistake in thinking the school actually cared about him. They really didn't. They can't do that. What the heck? Sending a student into a known attack? Deku cried out. He was clearly upset and kept protesting as if him screaming would change the minds of those in the room. It didn't work. See you tomorrow, problem child. Double Eyebags said as Katsuki left the staff room as his teachers discussed a course of actions. Katsuki was in a frustrated state the rest of the day. He knew the school never cared about him, it should have been obvious. But he was so mad. Cementos had given Katsuki a few looks the rest of the day, but he had said nothing of what had happened earlier. On the way to his house, Deku kept talking to Katsuki about the unfairness that was implemented at the school. Katsuki frowned as they walked. He was angry. So angry. Though he actually had a place at the school, but then they throw him into danger and pretend as if he's just a liability at this point. Someone to throw around like any other. He hated it. Katsuki punched the wall he was next to. His hand hurt like a fucking bitch, but he deserved it. Omigode kakanari keiki, do I need to gadathi doctor something? Ona thought looks really bedicet broken? Deku let out rapid-fire mumbles as he fret over Katsuki's injuries. The anger Katsuki felt before had dissipated after the punch into sadness. He should punch walls more often to remove his bad attitude. Hurting himself wasn't a good release is what anyone should tell him, although the only ones who would tell him that would be Deku and his parents. They didn't know him well enough to know that he deserved the pain. Katsuki let his bloody and bruised hand hang loosely next to him, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving him in immense pain he was convinced he deserved. Life isn't fair. You should know that best, Deku. The rest of the walk to Katsuki's house was silent. Deku noticed his hand was not taken care of, but Katsuki brushed him off when he mentioned it. Deku felt tears stream down his face. He hates how Kaken treats himself. Katsuki couldn't sleep that night, kept awake by Deku's sobs. Sobs that were his doing. He really was a terrible person. His hand throbbed with pain so unbearable it brought tears to his eyes. Katsuki got up in the morning feeling immense pain. He didn't know what to do with his arm, it hurt too much. He felt himself stagger across the room to get to the bathroom. It was like a blinding pain that hit all of his senses. He felt like his hand would rip in half, but it would happen slowly as to alarm all of his pain sensors and cause him as much damage as possible. It was pain unlike anything Katsuki had ever felt. It was an unforgiving pain, one that chided him for bad decisions with painful punishment. Katsuki started to tear up as he fell to the floor, screaming in pain. Hurried footsteps rushed towards the bathroom, and Katsuki's father burst into the bathroom. "What's wrong?" he asked, looking over Katsuki, who shielded his hand. His hand didn't look pretty, and his father would be able to tell right away what was wrong. "I tripped." "Surprised me." Katsuki brushed his father off. "If you need anything, don't be afraid to call for help." Katsuki nodded. "Will you be all right?" Katsuki nodded again, before Masaru offered a smile and left Katsuki to his own devices. It was hard, and Katsuki had to take many laborious breaths, but he got himself onto his feet before stumbling towards the mirror. He looked terrible. His skin was paler than usual, and he looked sickly. There were bags under his eyes almost bad enough to call himself eye bags. His eyes were bloodshot and his hair was a mess in and of itself. His hand was another matter. It was purple and mottled, and he could see it swelled very obviously. The skin around it was sweaty and pale. Katsuki winced as he assessed his injuries. He opened a cabinet with his other hand before grabbing some gauze and very shakily wrapping his hand with it. He grunted at the finished product. It wasn't a good wrapping job, but it'll have to suffice. He finished in the bathroom and walked back to his room. Katsuki had to pause a few times and clutch his hand because the pain made it hard for him to do anything. "Kaken," a weak voice called out, "you have to stop hurting yourself." Katsuki scoffed. "No. This is not up for discussion." "Deku, stop." "I will not. Please stop hurting yourself, it's hurting me." Katsuki looked away. "Please." Deku started crying again, and this time Katsuki felt tears roll down his face as well. "Sorry, but dash." "No buts. Please, Kaken." Deku dash. "For me." Deku crashed to his knees, bowing in front of Katsuki. Katsuki looked at him in silence. Deku looked back pleadingly. "I'll try." Katsuki whispered quietly, and Deku gazed at him with frustration for not agreeing completely, but also with a certain amount of proudness. Deku was proud of him. It made Katsuki fill with joy and regret all the same. Katsuki finished getting ready while Deku fussed over his injury. However, Katsuki refused to go to a doctor or inform anyone about his injuries. He just wanted to wait it out and have it heal by itself. It's not like Deku could have dragged Katsuki to a doctor or anything, as much as he wanted to. Katsuki spent more time than he would have liked wrapping his hand, getting dressed, and attempting to make his lunch. It was not that successful. As he was heading out the door, it became apparent to him that he was late for school. "Kaken, hurry." Deku was jogging next to Katsuki as he picked up the pace in hopes of not being too late. Katsuki had half hopes that he would be able to miss the trip to USJ, but he knew better than to expect it to happen. The villain attack would put teachers and students alike in danger, and Katsuki didn't want to be dragged into it. He wasn't heroic. He wasn't a hero student, he couldn't be good. He would be dead weight, and Katsuki knows he hates being weak, useless, and helpless. Yet, he is all of those things heading into a bad situation. The thought of it makes Katsuki shake. He's nervous and panicked. He doesn't want anyone to get hurt, but he'd prefer himself rather than any others. Katsuki made it to UA around 10 minutes late, but he still has enough time to be back outside for the trip. He sees a black bus in front of school, and he fills with dread. He forgot the fact that he's have to ride with Class 1A students. Students who annoy Katsuki with their presence. He rubs his forehead with his good hand, Now is not the time to worry about that. Katsuki rushes to put his backpack away, which he had to shake a few times because it got caught on his bandaged hand. The bandages also became looser, so he had to wrap his hand again, and since he was in a rush he re-wrapped them too tight, causing a spike of pain to shoot up his arm. He gasped and clutched his arm. "Kaken, don't rush too much. I don't want you hurting yourself even more." Deku looked at him with worried eyes. "Stop with the pity." Katsuki managed to gasp out. "You know it's not pity." Deku frowned. "We should get going." Katsuki nodded before wincing and walking towards the locker room. After much difficulty, Katsuki changed into his uniform for PE physical education. It was a blue jumpsuit with U.A's logo in white stripes. Since Katsuki didn't have a hero uniform, as he wasn't in the hero course, he had to wear the jumpsuit. "Let's do this," Deku said with a determined smile, but Katsuki could see he was as panicked and worried as he was. This whole situation wasn't a good one. "Kaken, you have to promise me to use your quirk if you're in a dire situation." "No. I can't. You know that," Katsuki shouted, seeing as no one was in the locker room with him. "Please. I can't lose you." Deku was desperate. I can't." "Kaken, I know you can. Don't hold yourself back because of me, please. I know it'll take time to grow comfortable with it again, and it can be a last resort. I'm not telling you to outright use it, at least not for now." Deku smiled, but it was a smile laced with worry and anxiety. "I'm sorry. I can't." Katsuki shook his head. This was something he wouldn't waver on. Deku sighed before muttering something Katsuki couldn't hear. He sighed. Deku had been trying to get him to use his quirk forever, but he didn't know if he could mentally or physically do it and be able to handle the outcome. "We have to go now," Katsuki murmured. Deku nodded and the two walked out together, taking a cloud of disappointment, worry, and frustration with them. Katsuki walked back outside, with his hand behind him. He saw double eye bags and a bunch of students with weird-looking costumes standing next to the bus. One kid in what looked like a knight's outfit was trying to wrangle all the students into lines to get on the bus. Coincidentally, he was also the kid who was clutching the emergency exit sign when the press broke through security, and he warned everyone about it. Also, that was when a stupid fuckmunch thought Katsuki would blow up. "Idiot. Bakugou, glad you made it?" Double eye bags gave a slight nod in his direction. "Spare me the bullshit," Katsuki growled out. "Kaken, attitude," Deku warned him. Katsuki just rolled his eyes in response. Looking around, Katsuki noticed that a few students were looking at him oddly. "I know, sorry," Katsuki signed as discreetly as he could, back to Deku, who looked at him with a hint of amusement and sadness. Katsuki hated his attitude. It was too harsh, yet he couldn't shake it no matter how hard he tried. It was something he absolutely hated about himself. That and his quirk hurt Deku the most, but Deku always used the excuse that his intentions weren't always harmful. But who really cared about intention? His intention is not always good either, and Deku knows that he just tries to make Katsuki feel better. He's sick of it. He wants to be treated as someone real, not who needs a babysitter. Although, having Deku with him has always helped, sometimes he still gets treated like a little kid who didn't know any better. "You may board the bus now," Double eye bags said in a bored tone to his class, and to Katsuki, before turning and finding a seat on the bus. Katsuki got on the bus after him, finding a seat at the very back of the bus next to the window. The other students in the class all rushed to find the best seats, but Katsuki could tell they were all wary of him because he was an unfamiliar face in their class. Once everyone had found their seats, Katsuki had an empty seat next to him, not that he was surprised. Who would want to sit next to him? He snorted. Although, that meant that Deku had his own seat next to Katsuki, so he supposed it was all right. Before the bus started moving, Double eye bags went through the rows making sure everyone was accounted for. When he finished, he stood at the front of the bus, gathering everyone's attention to him. "We have a guest accompanying us on this trip. Try to be nice to him," Double eye bags said before sitting down on his own seat. Katsuki felt all eyes turn on him. Some in curiosity and some in confusion. "Hi. What's your name?" a girl said. She had skin tinged a pink color and fluffy short pink hair, with 2 yellow horns sticking out, that framed her face and her square-shaped eyes with bright yellow irises and black scara. Her costume was a skin-tight suit with a pink and turquoise camouflaged pattern on it. Bakugou. I'm Ishido Mina. Don't care? Katsuki muttered under his breath. Ah, don't be like that, dude, a peppy blonde-haired boy with a black lightning bolt in his hair exclaimed. Katsuki felt like he recognized the boy. Wait, aren't you that guy I almost ran into on the first day? The blonde idiot, who looked like a knockoff Pikachu said as his eyes widened in realization. Fuck off. Aren't you pleasant? A girl with long green hair said matter-of-factually. She looked a lot like a frog, but Katsuki guessed that was the point. I'm a delight. Katsuki hissed. He received a few eye rolls from that statement. Clearly, a girl with dark blue hair and earphone jacks on her ears remarked. Katsuki just looked back outside the window as he heard the rest of the class converse with each other. If he could ward everyone off with his attitude, it could save them from making friends with a monster. Not that he'd want to be friends with any of those losers in the first place. It was easier to just silently look out the window than to converse with anyone. Around halfway through the bus ride, the conversation went to quirks. Naturally, everyone went on talking about their quirks and who in the class had the best quirks and such. It frustrated Katsuki, but he just rolled his eyes and kept staring out the window. What's your quirk, Bakugou? A girl with shoulder-length brown hair and rosy cheeks asked Katsuki, who flinched. He noticed that the inhabitants of the bus, yet again, had their eyes on him. None of your fucking business. A few classmates glanced at each other in mild frustration, but Katsuki would not tell any of these fuckers what his quirk was. After all, why should he? Come on, bro, a boy with spiky red hair and an annoying amount of cheeriness said in hopes of trying to get Katsuki to talk. What part of none of your business do you not get? Katsuki growled and the boy lifted his hands up in surrender. He heard whispers break out from the class, and felt his face tighten knowing they were about him. Katsuki did his best to ignore them, while trying to burrow into the wall of the bus and not hurt his concealed arm any more than it already was. They didn't try to talk to him the rest of the bus ride, probably because of his horrible attitude, but that was for the better. He came up with a plan in his head about how to approach this attack. He came up with a plan in case he was taken hostage and how to fight off the villains. He was one of the only people who knew the threat and what to expect from them. Their quirks were powerful and he suspected that the staff members of UA didn't exactly believe him, so he had to improvise Deku's plan. Once they arrived at their destination, before exiting the bus, Double Eyebags gave a quick and boring speech on behavioral expectations and how they had to represent the school, blah blah blah. Double Eyebags didn't seem excited to be giving the speech. While the other students were gathering their things, Katsuki and Deku gave each other nods. Katsuki knew what he had to do, and with Deku's support he knew he could do it. They exited the bus together. Katsuki followed the rest of the class inside USJ. Even he couldn't deny that it was a very cool place. Perfect for any rescue heroes to practice. And the perfect place for an ambush. As he was looking around the inside of the structure, like the rest of the students gasping in astonishment, he tried to spot any other exits to escape out of. But from where he was standing, he couldn't see any. Near the entrance where they walked in, stood a hero in a white astronaut-looking suit. Oh my goodness! That's the Rescue Hero 13, Deku said in admiration. Katsuki heard the girl with rosy cheeks say something very similar. Hello, Class 1A, 13 said. Today you will be going to these rescue zone to learn how to use your quirks for rescue. Now, I have a quirk that can be used for harm, but I chose to use them to help people and to save others. Just know, your quirk doesn't dictate your character and you have your abilities to use them for good things and not to harm others, so use them to save people as you will find they can be quite helpful for. Your powers are not meant to inflict harm. I hope you leave here today with the understanding that you are all meant to help people, and that's what I believe you all can do. Katsuki stared in shock at 13. Her words seemed to strike him across the face. His mind was churning and thinking through everything she said. It was something Deku has been trying to tell him for years, and yet it seemed different coming from her. He didn't know why. He didn't have much time to dwell. Behind 13 and Double Eyebags, a swirling purple portal formed. Emerging from it came a figure that was too far away to make out. Behind the figure from either side of it, villains flooded the USJ floors in a seeming never-ending wave. The students all stare in shock as Double Eyebags frowns. "Stay here and stay safe," he says in the most serious tone Katsuki's heard from him. He jumps into the sea of villains and starts to eliminate a few. It's admirable at best, but Katsuki had bigger problems. Or bigger fish to fry, as Deku liked to say. "Be careful," 13 called out to Double Eyebags. The students were busy watching Double Eyebags and didn't notice the purple warp appearing behind them. "We came here with a purpose," a voice said from behind Katsuki. He turned, seeing a purple warp, but this time with two large yellow eyes staring back at the students. "Yeah, we know. You want to kill All Might?" Katsuki rolled his eyes as he took a few steps forward. The students looked at him in shock and disbelief. "Please spare us from the monologuing. You seem to know a lot. Oh, fuck off and send us to the different locations already. Not very heroic of you," the warp villain teased as he looked at Katsuki with amusement. The funny thing was, as much as the villain had hoped to get a rise out of Katsuki, it wouldn't work. "Looks like someone didn't do their research." Katsuki smirked. "I'm from General Studies, dumbass." The warp villain didn't seem too pleased by Katsuki's remark. He hadn't expected this, but that was the plan. To make the villains confused. Because now they don't know if Katsuki knows everything or little pieces of the story, and so they grow unconfident in their knowledge and abilities. It was quite smart, but then again that was coming from the one who though of it. "Too much talking," the boy with shitty red hair exclaimed before jumping forward and attempting to punch the warp villain. He attempted to punch, missed. However, that did leave the villain's weak spot open for a few seconds. A collar of metal which was completely solid and which could be used against him. Katsuki smirked as the warp villain activated multiple warps. Katsuki feels himself stumble as a swirl of dark purple surrounds him and overwhelms his senses. It sends a wave of nausea through him as he tries to grasp at something, anything. It's just an endless space of nothingness but purple. There is no solid ground, although it feels like there is. It only lasted a few seconds, but it feels like an eternity before Katsuki is back on solid ground and in an old building. The world seems to spin around him, but he knows he doesn't have the time to get readjusted. Looking around, his vision is a little doubled, but he can see that he's with the red-haired boy who decided to charge into battle against the warp villain. Katsuki also noticed villains surrounding the two. Yet, surprisingly, they weren't attacking. Shitty Hair gave himself a fist bump before taking a step forwards in hopes of defeating the villains. Katsuki's eyes widened as he pulled Shitty Hair back towards him. However, unluckily, the hand he used to do it was his bandaged hand, which was now, yet again, alight with pain. Katsuki flinched back, but he'd caught Shitty Hair's attention, so it didn't matter too much. "What are you doing?" he asked curiously. "Don't just charge into battle, dipshit," Katsuki whispered angrily into his ear. "They're not attacking for a reason." The redhead nodded before getting into an offensive position, but listening to Katsuki and not jumping into the fight. "Kaken, I don't think they know what your quirks are," Deku murmured with a hand on his chin. This was a part of the plan that he didn't have the information on. "What, that's stupid." "Of course they dash." Katsuki stopped himself from signing as he realized how that explanation made a lot of sense. He smiled at Deku, thanking him for the advice. "They don't know our quirks?" Katsuki told Shitty Hair, who nodded contemplatively. "What do we do then?" he asked, and Katsuki was glad that someone was actually listening to him for once. It was kind of refreshing. "I'm going to try something. If it doesn't work, then charge into battle," Katsuki whispered before walking towards the villains. Shitty Hair smirked and gave Katsuki a thumbs up as he walked forwards. "You know my quirk?" He looked around the room at the overconfident villains who were all murmuring to each other in confusion. "I'll take that as a no." Katsuki adopted a wicked grin on his face. "It's super dangerous, you know. All of you can fucking die." The villains seemed to smirk at that. "Oh yeah? What a bluff. Liar. Are you willing to bet?" Katsuki asked. "You don't know if I'm telling the truth or not. So, you might want to surrender before you get harmed." "That's rich coming from you," a villain shouted out, causing a few laughs and agreements. But Katsuki had the villains right where he wanted them. He gave a slight nod to Shitty Hair. Alright, well, it was your choice. Katsuki raised his hands and shrugged as Shitty Hair rushed into battle. Only a few villains seemed to be expecting it, but it was kind of sad how little of a fight the villains put up against Shitty Hair. He might be fucking annoying with his cheeriness, but he had a cool fucking quirk. Katsuki will admit to feeling guilty as Shitty Hair beat up bad guys and made a few odd, they were supposed to be funny, remarks as he fought. Katsuki just stood there and did nothing, except maybe punch a guy once or twice, with his good hand of course. Of course, Shitty Hair managed to defeat all the villains, although it would have taken a lot less time if Katsuki had been actually useful and done something for once. It hurt him to be so useless, but he couldn't use his quirk. Deku looked at him mournfully as if he had lost something, which he probably had long ago. That was awesome, man. Shitty Hair said as he panted. Your quirk's fucking cool. Katsuki nodded as he started towards the exit. Really? It seemed as though Shitty Hair perked up at those words. Yeah, you defeated those villains like nothing. Well, you distracted them. I couldn't have do it without you. Shut up. What was that? Nothing. Oh, anyways, we make an awesome team. Sure. Katsuki knew they didn't. He made a horrible team with anyone because he was incapable of doing anything actually useful. Especially with a fucking injured hand that he kept forgetting about and using, leading to more pain. Katsuki exited the building with Shitty Hair trailing after him. Once outside, Katsuki had no idea what to do. As per usual, his plan hadn't really gone as he had hoped, and so he had to improvise, and now he was at a loss of what to do. Over there, Deku pointed to an open courtyard with a fountain where Katsuki could see a large hulking figure. He assumed that was probably the most dangerous thing here. So, naturally he ran towards it. Wait up! Shitty Hair yelled after him, but Katsuki was too occupied to care. He noticed what the figure was doing. It was holding something down, and as Katsuki grew closer he realized it was holding down Double Eyebags, who looked as if he had been hit by a bus. There was too much blood all over, and once Katsuki saw red he glanced away in fear of his mind going back to the images he tried not to dwell on. Those of Deku's body. Katsuki felt tears pool in his eyes, but he swiped them away and kept his eyes instead on a different figure. One who seemed to be talking. He had pale skin and light blue hair, and as he got closer Katsuki noticed the figure scratching at his neck occasionally, and because of that his neck seemed to be scratched up. It wasn't pretty. The weird part was that he had hands all over his body. Severed hands all connected and one placed on his face to block most facial features. Katsuki kept running towards the figures who he couldn't quite hear yet. I admire you, Eraserhead. Handysome said with what Katsuki had to assume was a creepy smile. Fuck off, bitch. Katsuki cupped his hands and screamed at Handy. An insolent little brat. Handy remarked. You're an NPC, not very important. He started to scratch his neck more rapidly. Don't care. Katsuki taunted as he slowed his pace a bit. Shitty Hair was running in a different direction, but Katsuki didn't have time to think about what he could be doing. Nomu, give him a lesson? Handy said in boredom and frustration. The large hulking figure that had a dark blue body riddled with scars rushed at Katsuki with an inhuman speed and grabbed his injured hand. The Nomu started to squeeze and Katsuki saw his vision go haywire as he screamed out. In pain. It was unbearable, and Katsuki felt like he was about to die. He kept screaming, and he couldn't stop as tears fell down in face in waves. Kaken! Deku cried out as tears spilled from his eyes. He reached out, but Katsuki was too far gone in pain to notice. Katsuki could see his vision turning black and fuzzy around the edges as he was plunged into unconsciousness due to the extreme amounts of pain he was feeling. His body couldn't handle it and it decided to shut down, if not temporarily. Katsuki didn't know what happened, but when he opened his eyes again he was staring up at the frog girl he saw on the bus. His whole body ached and his hand was almost numb, but instead set with a faint tingling and an overwhelming sense of pain that sent waves of nausea through his body. Katsuki glanced at his hand and then had to jerk forwards as he threw up everything he could. His hand looked disgusting. It was bloody and bruised with bandages trying to cling to a limp bundle of skin and bone, which was peeking out of his skin. Careful, the frog girl warned, But Katsuki was still so confused as he was retching, and so he ignored her. Once he finished puking up breakfast, lunch, dinner, and bile, Katsuki looked around, doing his best to ignore his pounding headache and smashed hand, seeing the Nomu engaged in a fight. With all might, Katsuki watched as Nomu pummeled All Might hit after hit, and was seemingly unaffected by the damage All Might had attempted to place onto the hulking thing. Katsuki saw Handy most likely going through his monologue from his safety of behind Nomu. "Take it easy." Frogget warned Katsuki again, but he ignored her. "Seriously, Kaken?" Deku's tone was a bit icy and Katsuki could hear the anger behind it. Near Frogget was a small boy with hair that seemed to be made up of purple bubbles. He was scared out of his fucking mind and Katsuki could see that he might cry any minute. Shitty Hair was also there, probably to help out the small group. Lying on the floor was Double Eyebag's mangled body and Katsuki choked out a sob at the sight. He averted his eyes as fast as he could, it was too much. Out of the corner of his eye, Katsuki could see movement, and when he turned his head to look he saw a Class 1A student rush into battle. Katsuki vaguely remembers seeing this kid on the bus. He had half white and half red hair, over one of his heterochromia eyes was a burn scar. Katsuki watched with widened eyes as Candy Cane tried to help fight off the Nomu with all might. He shot ice from one of his hands, but it didn't go as planned. Warper decided it was a good time to get back into the fight and configured his warps in a way that had Nomu with his body split between two warps, trapping All Might in a precarious position. But that gave Katsuki the opportunity he was looking for. He ran forward as fast as he could, letting adrenaline take over and ease his pain. "Wait!" Shitty Hair called after him and reached for his hand, but Katsuki ran too fast towards the battle. Katsuki ran until he was within distance to jump on Warper, and he held him down by his metal collar with as much strength as he could muster. Although he felt like screaming due to his hand, it was better to ignore it all. Nomu moved before the warps could slice it in half, giving All Might the chance to escape it. "Burn it to stop regenerating." Katsuki cried out to All Might and Candy Cane, who winced to Katsuki's confusion. It was something Katsuki had thought about on the way to USJ. From Deku he knew about Nomu's quirks, and with some of Deku's thinking they figured out what could be a possible weakness and a way to stop its regeneration. All Might nodded, although he had no fire in sight to burn Nomu with. Katsuki watched as All Might kept fighting Nomi. He also observed Candy Cane turn his attention towards Handysome as Shitty Hair decided to run forwards and help him. "Don't let him touch you with 5 fingers. Katsuki warned them. His quirk was a dangerous one, but one which could be avoided if they were careful. As Candy Cane and Shitty Hair fought Handy, he taunted All Might and spoke about the power that Nomu held. Katsuki did his absolute best to hold down Warper and to keep him from trying to help his allies. During Handy's teasing, All Might seemed to come to a realization as his punches became so rapid all you see was a blur. "Students, back off," All Might ordered as Shitty Hair nodded and carefully made his way back to the small group. Candy Cane followed him, sliding on ice. Katsuki noticed that the small group was carrying Double Eyebags towards the entrance where Warper was blocking the students, but was no longer because of Katsuki holding him down. Although 13 seemed to be on the floor with her suit's back ripped out. Katsuki winced at the sight, but she seems okay, at least he hoped. All Might kept punching Nomu, and a few seconds later a hulking figure could be seen flying through the top dome of the USA. Katsuki stared up in wonder, and since he was distracted for a few seconds it gave just enough time for Warper to break free of his hold on him. "Shit!" Katsuki cursed as Warper warped next to Handy, who was looking at All Might in a frustrated manner. Steam seemed to curl from All Might, and he wasn't moving at all. He actually looked pretty weak. It was odd to see. "Run." Deku seemed to realize that there was a split second of opportunity before Handy was going to reach towards an unmoving All Might. Katsuki didn't know who Deku was telling to run, or in which direction. So he ran towards All Might. Handy started to reach out towards All Might, but Katsuki threw himself between the two. Handy smiled wickedly before his hand touched Katsuki's cheek. Katsuki screeched, or was that Deku screaming? He couldn't tell. It hurt much more than he was expecting. And almost as an instinct, Katsuki's quirk activated. He stared in horror as a light erupted from his not-injured hand. The explosion threw Handy backwards and Katsuki clutched his arm in surprise. Tears flowed down his cheek. He didn't want to hurt anyone. He didn't mean it. He didn't want it. He hated it. Tears fell down his face as he stared at his hand with horror. He felt nauseous and he couldn't stop himself from retching on the ground next to him. He ignored his hand and bleeding cheek as his eyes stayed wide and his arms fell to his sides as Katsuki kneeled on the ground in a fit of sobs. He couldn't do it. That was when the other pro heroes had finally decided to make their appearance. As Handy tried to approach the crying Katsuki, he got shot right through the hand. Shigaraki, we must go. There are too many. Warper dragged Handy towards him. No. Kurogiri, we're so close. Wait. Handy struggled and sent a deadly glare at Katsuki and All Might. Warper opened a warp and the villains were gone. Katsuki is left on the ground with All Might behind him. He tries to control his breathing, in and out, in and out, in and out. Kaken, Deku calls out, but Katsuki doesn't look up. Kaken. Katsuki raises his head a little. Look at me. Deku sounds angry, and Katsuki looks him right in the eyes as a few tears make it past his eyes. I understand things are hard for you, but I hate having to see you hurt every damn day. I love you all. I don't want anything bad to happen to you, and I may be overprotective because I don't want what happened to me happen to you. I've long forgiven you, so get that in your fucking head. Your quirk is dangerous, but like what 13 said, it's what you choose to do with it. I know you're a good person, and would never harm anyone intentionally. You've learned, and you can't let your quirk affect you so deeply. I can't loose you more than I already have. I love you. Katsuki feels more tears flowing down his face, but he wipes them away. Blood from his cheek smears across his face, but he doesn't care. His quirk is pathetic. He hates it. He can only hurt people with it. It caused everything, along with Katsuki's assholery in general. He hates himself. But he can't hurt Deku any more than he already has. He loves Shim too much for that. I'll try. It was quiet, but Deku heard it. Good. You are so strong, Kaken. Your quirk shouldn't hold you back. It should propel you forwards. And it won't be easy, but you can do it. Deku's brow was set with determination. If he really wanted something, Katsuki had no doubts he would be able to achieve it. I can't control my natural reaction to my quirk. It horrifies me. But I'll work on it, or I'll try. Katsuki signed, seeing as he already raised enough suspicion. Students were looking at him. If you saw a sobbing kid, you would too. And you would wonder why he was sobbing. Katsuki just went through more than they could imagine, and he didn't want their judgment. Even if he did deserve it. We've got a long way to go, but we'll do it together. Deku nodded. Now, give them hell. Katsuki nodded before signing, I love you, to Deku. He stood up with blood smeared on his face coming from a bloody cheek and a smashed and mangled hand limply hanging next to him. Katsuki walked towards the pro heroes who had just arrived, his sights set on the principal. All the students seemed fine as Katsuki walked past them, so he paid the no mind. He was too focused on another task. The aura he gave off was one not to be messed with, and the students parted around him as he glared right at the principal. Katsuki was furious. You are a fucking idiot. Katsuki was mad. No, he was beyond mad. He was furious to the point where he didn't really care if he was yelling at the principal of his school, only that this whole situation could have been avoided. Katsuki heard the ringing of an ambulance as it approached you. We didn't know you were telling the truth. We couldn't risk it. Principal Nizu said calmly. He was supposed to be intelligent, not this fucking stupid. Oh yeah? So you decide to lead a class into an area with a known villain attack. We couldn't focus all our resources because there were other classes and dash. Excuses, excuses, Katsuki had everyone's attention now. You all want to know what this fucker did? The students looked at each other in confusion, but Katsuki kept on talking. He was told there was going to be a villain attack at USJ on this very day. He was warned. He was even told that the leader had a disintegration quirk, that there was a villain who had a warp quirk, and one to block radio signals, and an engineered villain that had the capabilities to take down All Might. He was even told what their goal was, to kill All Might. And what did he do with this information, you might ask? Nothing. He sent a class of students to a no-villain attack, and even decided to send an extra student from general studies because they didn't believe it. The students looked at the teachers with worry and confusion, if almost to have them verify what was said. None of the teachers would meet their eyes. They could see Katsuki visibly steaming with anger. As the paramedics came and took double eye bags onto a stretcher to minimize his injuries, one came up to Katsuki for his forehead and crushed hand. But he waved them off because he wasn't done yet. Proud now? Are you happy that the information about the villain attack I gave you was true? Happy you got one of your teachers hurt so badly that he looks like a mangled corpse? He was close to death, and you could have stopped it if you weren't such pathetic assholes. The teachers seemed to flinch at Katsuki's words. He knew mentioning double eye bags might not have been the best decision, however he needed them to understand what he was saying. It could have been a lot worse, but we came in time. Go to the paramedics and get cleaned up, a pro-hero said to Katsuki. Hell no. Don't get confused here. You guys did jack shit. It wasn't worse because your students are actually capable, not because of your own talents. Some of the teachers had the audacity to look ashamed and apologetic, meanwhile the students were shocked and also tired. It had been a long day and a long attack, even more so since learning this new information. You all have your jobs to do. I get it. But if you're going to do them well. This is supposed to be a school. You're supposed to protect students, not throw them into a danger you've been warned of. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if any of your precious students decides to become a villain. With the way you're treating them, it makes sense. This attack is on you. Katsuki knew his words hit the heroes with a heavy blow, but he was done sugarcoating things. Bakugou, I'm sorry for allowing you to attend this field trip, Cementos said as he bowed at Katsuki. I appreciate your sentiments, although sorry doesn't change a thing. Be sorry for Class 1A. After all, general studies doesn't get too much attention, they're a hero class, they have to deal with it all. Katsuki sneered. He admits if he got kicked out of the school, that would suck, but he wouldn't mind too much. Katsuki started to walk away towards the paramedics, but he turns and says one final thing, leaving the teachers shell-shocked and the students frustrated and upset. Letting people get hurt? Having them take the brunt of your mistakes? Last time I checked, that's villainy. Katsuki's hand was in a very bad condition. He ended up needing surgery for it, which the school was all too happy to pay for, and when Katsuki found out about it, he rolled his eyes. Although, he was kinda happy to see that his frustration had hopefully caused some changes in the status quo. Although, he had to stay in the hospital for a few checkups before he was free to go. The surgery wasn't particularly fun. He was under the influence of a drug to numb the pain, but it's still an experience Katsuki hopes to never be in again. However, with how things are going, he doubts he's done with surgery, much to Deku's frustration. Throughout it all, Deku was a range of emotions. Katsuki could tell this was as hard for him as it was for Deku, having to see everything go down and not be able to help. Even more so because he had the information in the first place, so the school wasn't discredited Katsuki as much as they were Deku. Katsuki could appreciate Deku's calm head through it all. At some points he was happy for Katsuki, and after giving his rant, he had told him. They deserved it. Physically, Deku knew Katsuki was not getting any better at all, to his dismal. However, Deku liked to think that Katsuki had grown mentally and was becoming stronger, and Deku couldn't have been happier about it. Katsuki knew the nerd was ecstatic about the prospect of Katsuki using his quirk, and possibly visiting his auntie Inko. Katsuki hadn't had the time to do so recently, however Deku still pressured his about it. And so did his parents. He was proud that Katsuki was willing to try with his quirk, maybe. And that he had used it, albeit involuntarily. Again, when he came out of surgery, Deku was proud of how far he'd gotten, although that did not spare him from the frustration and the speech about safety that followed. Because Deku wasn't happy that Katsuki needed surgery or that his cheek was busted up and he needed to wear a bandage over it for a short period of time. Don't die on me again, please, Deku had asked him with an air of seriousness. I didn't die, nerd, Katsuki had chuckled. Deku glared at him with an overprotective intensity that had Katsuki both rolling his eyes and also wanting to hug the stupid idiot. Fine. I won't die again, Katsuki said sarcastically, but it was good enough for Deku. Deku had stared down sadly at Katsuki's hand where a jagged scar ran horizontally across his hand. It still ached and Katsuki couldn't really move it at all, but it would get better. Right now he couldn't use it, but he would be able to after it fully healed and maybe some physical therapy. Don't worry about it, nerd, Katsuki said as he shielded his hand from Deku's eyes. Deku looked a bit saddened but decided not to say anything further. Katsuki sat upright in the hospital bed provided as his parents came to visit, and of course the school, which caused another shouting match to break out. Katsuki would have still be screaming about the injustice of the system were it not for the nurses who had come in during the argument to warn Katsuki and the school's representative that they needed to stop because they were being too loud. One of them also added that the representative was bothering and upsetting one of his patients, causing the representative to leave in annoyance, although she had tried to hide it. The nurse had given Katsuki a wink afterwards, and he gave him a gracious smile. When his parents had visited, they were worried for him. Then Katsuki was a bit worried for the school. Because of course Mitsuki blew up when she learned what had happened, and although it was a bit troublesome and required Masaru to hold her back, Katsuki was glad that she still had some of her old fire, which he had to inherit, naturally. Mitsuki was a smart woman, and she might not be the best when it came to emotions or her son, but she was trying. And in this case her way of trying was yelling at the school because while they were all in their safe campus in their tidy whiteys, her son and other students were thrust into a knowing danger and were not warned about it, causing the harm of Katsuki and one of their own teachers, not to mention the mental trauma all the students went through. Katsuki could be seen smirking throughout the whole exchange. It really was quite amusing to see trained representatives from the school cower in front of his screaming mother. Masaru didn't hold her back too much, which was one of the ways he communicated his agreement, along with chiming in every so often in a tone Katsuki had never heard of. His father was always the calm one, but he seemed just as angry as Mitsuki, if not even more so. Geez, I almost wish I could have my shot at yelling at them too, Deku murmured, causing Katsuki to laugh. Overprotective idiot, you know I can handle myself. Yeah, but I want to yell at them. Katsuki nodded in understanding. He knew Deku was angry and needed to vent, or at least let some things out. Tell me what you were going to say to them. Really? I don't want you to get angry. Nerd, I don't say things I don't mean, Katsuki said with a snort, before his eyes widened. Thoughts began to race through his mind as he realized what he had implied. He had implied that when he told Deku to kill himself he meant it. But he didn't. It sounded like he did though. All the insults and jabs, had he really meant it? If that was true, what was wrong with him? He was a monster, no lying about it. He couldn't believe it. He never wanted those outcomes, he never wanted to hurt Deku, but did he? Was he lying to himself? He couldn't be. Deku only brought him joy. But he didn't always. What had happened to change things? He did care, he couldn't. But what? Katsuki couldn't breathe as he frantically struggled to get air in his body. He was a monster. He couldn't believe it. That's what he was. All along. Katsuki closed his eyes and placed his head in his hands. It was all too much, he was too warm. Katsuki threw the blankets off of him, but he still didn't feel quite right. He couldn't do it. Kaken. Deku was crying. Or was he crying? He couldn't quite tell. Stop it. Katsuki clenched his eyes shut. He wanted it all to go away. Listen to me, Deku screamed. I've forgiven you. You need to breathe. It didn't happen immediately, and took much longer than he would have liked, but Katsuki managed to calm down a bit. It allowed his breathing to become more regular and controlled. Kaken, it'll be okay? Deku looked at him solemnly. Katsuki nodded, but he wasn't sure if those words were genuine or not. Or if they were truthful anyways. Tell me about what you were going to say. Katsuki choked out. Deku nodded and started to rant on and on about the injustices and the school's bad system. Katsuki just zoned out and got absorbed into thoughts of nothingness. This time, though, was more comforting as he heard Deku's voice and enjoyed his company. He knew it was getting worse. He kept going into panics, and even as he laid in the bed he felt himself shaking. He refused to be weak. He couldn't afford to be weak enough to get scared at the simplest things and fall into a vast swirling vortex of the past and all of the mistakes he had to go through. He couldn't keep going like this, he needed to get better. Katsuki fell asleep as he listened to Deku with an expression of half sadness and half determination written across his face. Katsuki had one last checkup and then he could leave, which he was looking forward to. Being stuck in a stuffy room in a hospital really wasn't how Katsuki liked to spend his time. Of course, the school visited one final time and attempted to make a deal with him. When they asked if he would be quiet about this whole issue and his injuries sustained because of the school's incompetence, Katsuki refused it immediately. He didn't care about the money which they had offered. His parents were fashion designers after all, and he didn't need more, especially in exchange for his silence. If Katsuki was good at anything, it would probably be not letting people silence him, along with being as loud as he wants. What was unexpected, however, was who visited him next. "Hey, Bakugou!" Knockoff Pikachu belted out once he entered Katsuki's room. Behind him were pinky, round cheeks, fur eyes, candy cane, shitty hair, weird elbows, and Frogget. Katsuki glared at the group who had walked in. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see Deku smirking. "The fuck are you doing here?" "Well, as class president I found it my duty to Never mind. What the fuck do you want?" Katsuki was getting a little frustrated. He didn't like having strangers barge into his hospital room for no reason. "Thank you." Shitty hair blurted out. "What?" Katsuki was confused. He looked at the group quizzically. They all seemed a bit nervous and shy. Except for Candy Cane, he looked like he didn't want to be there at all, which made Katsuki even more frustrated. "We wanted to say thank you. You know, for all you did for our class. It's crazy that they did nothing to stop the attack, but you worked to keeping us safe and we are grateful for that." Pink Cheeks bowed as she spoke for the group. "Yeah, you're super manly. Even if you act like an asshole. Kaminari." Whoops. The group started to tease each other a little, but Katsuki was frozen. They were grateful for him? When he didn't help at all and did nothing to warn them. They appreciated the little he could do. Katsuki looked back towards Deku, who gave him an easing smile. "They're not wrong." He said it softly, but Katsuki still heard him. He bit his lip before turning back to the group. He didn't believe they were right, and although he knew Deku was trying to help him, he didn't need it. Dude, stop." Knockoff Pikachu whined as weird elbows taped his hands together to stop him from waving them around like they were. Katsuki had no idea what was going on, but he faintly smiled at the antics of the group. After a little bit they calmed down, seemingly realizing they came to the hospital for a reason not to fool around. Katsuki remembers zoning out while Four Eyes gave him a little speech on something he didn't even remember. It had something to do with safety and gratefulness, maybe? "We're glad you're doing okay though." Weird elbows interrupted Four Eyes, who seemed to be willing to talk forever. Katsuki didn't really remember seeing weird elbows that much, but he probably was friends with the rest of the group, so he decided to come along. Katsuki nodded at what he said, before observing the fact that Candy Cane had been silent the whole time and was staring at him analytically. "Seriously, dude. When one of the students said you were going to explode during the evacuation, I was super worried." Shitty Hair said, making Katsuki tense up as the other students in the room agreed with him. Deku sent Katsuki a worrying look, but he didn't want the pity. "Although, man, you have such a cool quirk. You just blasted that villain like it was nothing." Shitty Hair exclaimed, seeming to be excited for Katsuki. Katsuki froze on the spot. His breathing was becoming shaky. He didn't know anyone had saw him, but it looks like he was wrong. This was bad. Super bad. "Get out," Katsuki said firmly as he glared. "What? But what did we dash?" "I said get out," Katsuki yelled. "All of you." The group sent him worrying and confused looks as they filtered out of the room. Shitty Hair looked ashamed, but Katsuki wasn't in the right mind to even try to make him feel better. He had his own problems to worry about. And one of them was the fact that Candy Cane was still standing there. "Don't you understand? Get OU dash." Katsuki was furious that he dared to go against his wishes, especially because he needed them to leave. "I know how you feel." Candy Cane interrupted him with a sad look on his face. "I'm going to beat you." "What the fuck?" Katsuki asked in confusion. "You'd make a good hero." Candy Cane frowned as if he was upset by what he had said. "Leave." Katsuki was angry. How dare these students burst in and Deku looked at Katsuki as if he was thinking very deeply, and Katsuki knew he probably agreed with those assholes. All Katsuki wanted to do was curl into a little ball and cry for the rest of his life until he dies. It sounded petty nice. Although there were a few problems with that. First of all being Katsuki didn't want to seem weak. It was pathetic of him to do that and very stupid. He wasn't supposed to be weak, although he was a lot weaker than he wanted to be. And he couldn't let go of Deku's dream. He had to make it to the top and help people, but he wasn't good enough to be a hero. He was too pathetic for that, too mean, too aggressive, too selfish. It was too wrong and Katsuki was too imperfect for it all. The second problem was that he had another visitor. Nothing could have prepared him for who walked through that door with a worried smile on her face, wrinkles from years of worry and distress. The woman was a bit rounder with dark green hair pulled into a half bun on the back of her head. She seemed determined and fierce. Deku's eyes shone with unshed tears at the sight of her, as his thinking face disappeared in favor of a face of longing that sent stabs to Katsuki's heart. Midoriya Inko had walked through the door. And Katsuki was trapped. Inko sat down in the chair next to Katsuki and offered him a smile. He didn't return it as he stared at the woman he probably feared the most in his entire life with a shocked expression on his face. He couldn't believe she had just walked in the door and now he had to interact with her. And she hates him because of how much of a terrible person he is and what he did. And it's all his fault. But she didn't throw any insults at him. She didn't even utter a single word. Talk to her. Deku hissed to Katsuki. This is your chance and you can't blow it. Katsuki gulped. Deku sent him a pointed glare and opened his mouth to try to convince Katsuki, but someone spoke up first. We don't have to talk if you don't want to, Katsuki. She said it in a soft, comforting tone. But, still, Katsuki felt himself flinch once she spoke. Katsuki knew she didn't walk in for nothing. She had something to say to Katsuki, and she was going to say it. Katsuki knew he couldn't resist it and he had to stop being pathetic. Like Deku said, this was his chance, and Deku hadn't heard Inko's voice in so long that Katsuki felt like he owed it to him to say something, anything, to Midoriya Inko. Even if she made him feel shittier than he already did, it had been a few months and Katsuki knew she was hurting even more than Katsuki was. Katsuki knew he had to speak. But it wasn't easy. She terrified him even more than he'd care to admit, so he had to muster up enough strength and ease himself enough before stammering a reply to her. No, it's all right. I don't want to pressure you. Inko looked sad. Incredibly sad. It's all right. Both Katsuki and Deku said at the same time, but while Katsuki was talking to Inko, he knew Deku was talking to him. You know, when I heard you were in the hospital I was so worried. Inko looked at him and that's when Katsuki could see the full weight on her shoulders. Her eyes were dark and they had bags under them, not to mention the way Inko's shoulders hunched like she had been holding up the sun her whole life, and now that it was gone all she left of it were her hunched shoulders right where the sun was supposed to be. The analogy wasn't too far off. Why? Katsuki blurted out to her. Because I haven't heard anything from you. You're like a second son to me. Inko smiled before sighing at the implication that she already had a son. I'm not worth it. Katsuki murmured as Inko's gaze pierced him. Look, I'm going to get right to it. Inko sighed as she took Katsuki's hands in her own. It made him flinch and his hand gave off a faint ache as if the ghost of the wound was still there. Katsuki hadn't realized he'd been shaking until Inko took his hands, and suddenly he was hyper-aware of the everything, the ticking clock, shining sun, and footsteps in the hallway overwhelming his senses. He felt a bit uncomfortable with Inko holding his hands, but that's because of his fear. Or at least he tried to tell himself that so he could overcome it. You're like a son to me. You and Izuku had the most beautiful relationship, and I know when you both started growing up, all the world wanted was to separate you two. The praise you received and society's view on quirks caused a fissure between you. You were never great with emotions, and you often say things you don't always mean. One day it went too far. And Izuku died. Inko had a few tears rolling down her cheek as Katsuki was shaking his head. Deku wasn't dead. He was right next to him, and he was staring at his mother intently. You shut yourself out from everyone after that, and you refused to eat or use your quirk. What society called a blessing had become a curse. It's hard, Katsuki, I know it is. Every day I find myself thinking about what it would be like if Izuku was still around. I still call him for dinner sometimes. It's not easy. Inko closed her eyes as if imagining something for a second. Katsuki brushed his own cheek, finding it wet. He hadn't realized he's been crying. But then again, whenever Deku was brought up, he seemed to start crying. It was probably the nerd's curse. I want you to know that it was your fault. You let people get to your head and you let society steer you down a dark path. But it was also the fault of the kids who egged you on, the professors who did nothing, the parents for not noticing, and Izuku for believing what you two had was broken. I know it's not, and I forgive you, Katsuki. I have long ago, because while you are partially to blame, you also kept him going day and night. Inko was smiling as she pressed her forehead against Katsuki's. He loved you, Katsuki. Katsuki started to sob as all the memories of Deku sprouted like small seeds turning into beautiful flowers. I love him too, Katsuki says. I know. He loves you too, Katsuki adds. Inko looks at him with a bewildered expression before smiling and hugging Katsuki with all her might. Katsuki hugged her back as the two cried together, wrapped in Deku's arms as well as each other's. Inko had come up with an idea for Katsuki. He would write down every memory of Deku he had, big or small, into a journal. Even if it was Deku's favorite ice cream flavor, which was strawberry, or maybe the one time he got his wrist stuck in a fence's chains and wouldn't stop crying about it. It was a good idea, and Deku even helped him out with it, although that might have been cheating. Deku seemed to be a bit happier now that Inko and Katsuki had repaired their relationship, and Katsuki's parents seemed just as happy. And if they never told Katsuki that they gave Inko weekly updates on his well-being? Well, that was okay. It would all be okay. Even if Katsuki realized he should probably apologize to the students who visited him. Nah, it'll be fine. Extra. You know, I don't think it was me who kept him going. Katsuki marveled. Of course it was, what are you saying? Inko exclaimed. Maybe it was me. Katsuki hummed. But then it was me and all might. Inko looked at Katsuki in a calculating manner for a few seconds before the two burst out into laughter. Stop it, Deku cried out. That wasn't funny. But soon he found himself laughing with his mother and his brother. Before he knew it, Katsuki was back at school. They discharged him shortly after Inko's visit and the last checkup he had, which was a relief because staying in that stuffy room was not fun. Deku called it a punishment for getting hurt, but regardless of what it was, Katsuki was free of it now. The jagged scar across his hand, from the surgery, would probably not be going anytime soon, at least according to the doctor. However, the scar on his cheek would most likely disappear after some time, but how much Katsuki couldn't say. Katsuki could tell that Deku was happy. Really happy. It was because of Katsuki's talk with Inko and her reassurance of what Deku had been saying for a long time. Katsuki was nervous when he walked up to you at a high school once again. He didn't know what it was, maybe the distrust he held in the staff at the moment. Or possibly something else. It was more a feeling and Katsuki couldn't put a name on it, but he didn't exactly feel safe. It will be okay. Deku smiled at Katsuki with an underlying tone of, don't be too insecure now, please. Yeah. Katsuki looked up at the large sprawling structures in front of him. Deku nodded. Go give him hell for me, Kaken. Already planning on it? It was something very bold to say, but Katsuki knew it was the answer Deku was hoping for. A glimpse into a different Katsuki, one who was a bit more aggressive and a bit happier. Katsuki straightened his posture as he walked into UA. A lot of students ignored him, but others seemed to whisper, and it felt as though the whispers, however faint they were following him. Katsuki just powered on to put his backpack away, and then to Class 1C. It was only after he had sat down and let go of a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding in that he saw Eyebags walking towards his desk. What happened to you? He asked. A's incompetence. Katsuki replied harshly. The harshness wasn't directed at Eyebags but instead said with frustration. Eyebags sent him a look of amusement and confusion. Sounds like someone's unhappy. You know it. Katsuki huffed out as he crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair. What about you? Katsuki figured he should probably show at least a little human decency. Me? Eyebags sounded surprised, as if people usually didn't ask about him. Yeah, you dimwit? Katsuki grumbled. Pleasant as always, I see. Eyebags smirked. No, but I'm fine. Katsuki raised his eyebrows at Eyebags. The way he said it didn't make it seem like he was fine, but he knew he shouldn't press. The two sat together in silence for a little bit, before Eyebags said one more thing. You're a real asshole. Katsuki looked at him with a look of confusion and amusement. He opened his mouth to reply with a witty remark, but Cementos had walked into the door before he could. Good morning, sensei. The class echoed, but Katsuki just crossed his arms before leaning back in his seat. Throughout the morning, Katsuki did his best to ignore the concerned and pitying glances from Cementos. But he still noticed them, and so he decided to just zone off as Cementos gave his spiel on upcoming events and anything important. I'm sure you have heard of the attack on Class 1A. Cementos was looking right at Katsuki, who decided to pay attention. Although it was something horrible, you all still have the sports festival to look forwards to. There is the opportunity of transfers into the hero course if that is what you are interested in. The class started to whisper among each other, but Katsuki narrowed his eyes before smirking. He was going to win that fucking festival, and when they asked if he wanted to transfer, he'd stun them with his unchangeable. No. Yeah, Katsuki was going bring fucking hell to them. The thought of it almost made him feel giddy. Cementos looked at Katsuki thoughtfully before stepping back, allowing present Mike, who Katsuki didn't know entered the room, to start his lesson plan. Katsuki didn't really care for his lesson, so instead he planned out what he'd be doing for the sports festival. He knew Deku wanted him to use his quirk, but it wasn't an option at the moment. He had to beat everyone quirkless, he just had to. Katsuki looked down at his desk full of focus. He always avoided watching sports festivals. He had no use, but because of that he had no idea what to expect. He'd just have to train harder than anyone else. And well, that wasn't hard. Katsuki knew he could beat everyone in general studies, regardless of their quirks. He already knew what they were, and so he'd have to go into Deku mode and analyze Class 1A and the other classes. He'd gain more equal ground that way with Bakugou. Present Mike shook Katsuki from his thoughts. What? Katsuki asked gruffly. Please answer the question on the chalkboard. Katsuki grumbled his protests before answering present Mick's question. The rest of the morning passed by slower than Katsuki had wanted, probably because of the pitying and angry looks some of the teachers gave Katsuki. It was pathetic. He wanted none of it. Although, anger was more acceptable than any pity. At lunchtime, Katsuki just wanted to be done with the day. He wished for a peaceful lunch with no distractions. Clearly nothing was going how he wanted to because he found Eyebags talking, unhappily, with the stupid fucking idiots who decided to visit him in the hospital. The second Katsuki saw them, he turned around completely. He didn't want to talk to them at all, so instead he sought out a different lunch spot. He wasted a few minutes trying to find someone he could eat lunch by himself, before Deku gave him an option. How about the roof? Deku mused. It works. Katsuki grunted as the two made their way to the roof for lunch. There is a nice breeze outside as Katsuki sits in the very middle of the roof. He smiled a little bit. It was a nice day, except for everything that had happened so far. Deku walked towards the edge of the roof with a curious look on his face. It was a quite peaceful day, he observed. There was a soft murmuring of students walking around the campus, and a few teachers slipping into classrooms. It was the kind of environment that was comforting and inviting. It was what Deku would have wanted if he could have had it. Even simply watching the happy grins and glee laughing put him at ease. Katsuki was lucky to be here, regardless of shitty staff members. Katsuki hadn't realized Deku was standing near the edge until after he had set his lunch down and sat next to it. If you want a quirk that badly, why don't you take a swan dive off the roof and hope for one in your next life? Katsuki screamed as he stumbled forwards with the hopes of reaching his friend. Stop! Deku turned his head with confusion at Katsuki's words. He turned his head back as he observed Yudare's campus. All of a sudden it struck him. Katsuki was afraid. He was scared with Deku being so close to the edge. He thought he was going to jump. Sorry, Kaken, Deku said sheepishly as he scratched the back of neck. He took a few steps backwards before turning back around. Katsuki's face began to twitch as his face was set with a deep frown. Be fucking careful, and don't go near the edge again. Katsuki ordered Deku harshly. Didn't know you had control over me. Deku muttered sarcastically, but Katsuki just sneered at him before sitting back down next to his lunch. Deku laid on his back next to Katsuki, staring up at the sky. What does falling on a cloud feel like? Katsuki's face visibly softens. Probably like falling through mist, dumbass. Sure. But would it? You're a fucking idiot. You know you love me. Deku flipped his body so that he was on his stomach and looked at Bakugou with wide puppy eyes and his hands positioned to frame his face. I can take it back. You wouldn't. Deku narrowed his eyes. Sure. After a few seconds of silence, Katsuki shifted his body so that he was lying on the ground next to Deku, with his back pressed against the solid roof. It was nice to be in each other's company as they sat together for a few minutes. Katsuki felt at peace as the breeze rolled over him. Kaken, Deku said, breaking the silence. I need to talk to you about something important. Katsuki gestured with his hand to get Deku to continue talking. Deku sighed heavily before speaking. Look, I understand you want to make it to the top and win the sports festival without using your quirk, but you can't. Katsuki furrowed his brow and opened his mouth to say something. Let me finish. Deku ordered. As a kid I always wanted to be a hero and to save people, but I never worked towards it. I sat around wishing and whining for something to change. I understand that more now. I would have never been able to make it to U.Hero courses, and I wouldn't stand a chance at the sports festival unless I had support gear and worked my butt off every day to get stronger. That's how society is. Bullshit. Katsuki grumbled as he sat up. It's not. Deku yelled, you keep idolizing me, like I was some perfect person. I'm not even close. You keep an image of me as that quiet, smart, and clingy nerd, but ignore all my imperfections. You claim it's all your fault even though I had a stake in it too. Stop placing all the blame on you. If it wasn't you who bullied me, it was going to be someone else. Katsuki looked at Deku in shock. Never. Again. Katsuki screamed. You fucking Deku. You really think it's your fault? It's not even close. Whatever, Deku snapped harshly. I'm not perfect, and I wasn't strong enough to fight back. That's my fault. No. It was never your fault, Katsuki fumed as he stood up. You're missing the point. Deku said in an exasperated tone. I'm not perfect, and I wouldn't have been able to make it as far as you have. I share some of the blame, whether you think so or not. And by not using your quirk you're hurting me even more. That's not true. My quirk only hurts people. Katsuki put his hands on his head as he panted heavily. You're wrong. Deku had tears in his eyes. I never had a quirk, and by not using yours it's disgraceful. Katsuki looked at Deku in shock. You're not using what I always wanted. Deku stood up and turned his back on Katsuki. It's ironic really. Why can't you see? Deku shook his head. Why can't you see? If you don't use your quirk you're taking for granted what I have always wanted to have. You're wasting it. It's the biggest disgrace to me. Deku turned around, and Katsuki saw how broken the boy looked. His eyes were red and tears streamed down his face. You're my hero. Deku smiled faintly. But you have to be your own hero too? Katsuki dryly chuckled. What's that about idolization? I am a bully, yet you only see between the lines. You see what could have been, not what did happen. I've been a disgrace to you all of my life, and I don't know if that will ever truly change. A few tears slipped down Katsuki's cheeks. No, Kaken. I saw what others refused to see. You think that, but it's wrong. All along through my life I thought you were looking down on me, and yet you were my hero all this time. I'm no one's hero. Then be your own. Save yourself from what's happening. I fucking can't. Katsuki clutched his hair. And I don't know if you can either. Kaken, you're a victim, not a villain. Stop thinking you are. Deku took a few steps towards Katsuki. I don't know if I can believe that anymore. I told you to kill yourself. I did that. And you actually jumped. You actually listened? Why did you listen? It was time. Bullshit. Katsuki looked at Deku with a desperate glare. Please don't tell me you believe that. Deku looked down at his feet, with a guilty expression on his face. Katsuki closed his eyes as he shook his head. Deku wasn't entirely wrong in the fact that he was idolizing him a bit. Well, maybe it was a lot. Katsuki had forgotten Deku was a human, and was full of anxiety and problems. Human problems. But that was no excuse for him to blame himself, and yeah, that was pretty hypocritical, but the situations between him and Deku were different. Katsuki wiped his eyes, and started to pace on the roof, but he didn't stray too close to the edges. The more he thought things through, the more tears started to spring in his eyes against his control. He had to stop being weak. It seemed all he did these days was cry, have panic attacks, and yell at people. That really didn't speak well towards his character, and he was all too aware of that. He hated how pitted he was, how people looked down upon him. Deku especially. But at this point he couldn't even say he deserved the pity. The Katsuki of the past would have loved to be saved of the pitying glances, but now he almost wanted it. He wanted someone to care about him. Which was fucking stupid because pity and caring were so different, but Katsuki didn't care anymore. He really didn't. Katsuki violently shook his head before stopping his pacing, and looking at Deku with an intense gaze, and speaking what had been on his mind for a long time. Stop pretending. I'm a fucking monster. You know that, but you refuse to admit it. Katsuki frowns. Why? You're so eager to be the bad guy. Deku looked up at the sky. You just want to understand everything. Not all emotions have words, you know? Deku smiled faintly at Katsuki, before a look of overwhelming sadness overcame him. It's hard. It's hard when I have to convince myself that you're a good person, and I have to convince you. Deku clasped his hands together. But monsters are typically supposed to be imaginary beasts who are frightening. And it may not have ever seemed like it, but Kaken, I'm not afraid of you. I never have been truly afraid of you. Deku started to play with his shirt, and he looked down as if he was afraid. But Katsuki could hear how his tone was laced with hope and forgiveness. Sure, you frightened me on occasion, but that doesn't mean I was scared of you. I was more scared of what you saw of yourself. I'm scared of what you've become and how you've driven people away. I was scared about what would happen to you. Katsuki couldn't stop it. Tears started to stream down his face. Then why did you jump? He could barely choke out the words. Deku let out a short, dry, humorless chuckle. I really don't know. It is not something that can be explained. Pain doesn't really work that way, and even though I want to, I can't tell you. Katsuki suddenly sat down on the ground. He stared ahead, blinking occasionally, but not moving much otherwise. And I wasn't born again with a quirk, but I got an even better gift. Deku smiled as he knelt next to Katsuki. I got to be your friend. You were always my friend. It was very quiet, but Deku heard the words coming from Katsuki's mouth. The two sat in more silence. Deku knew there were thoughts mulling around in Katsuki's head. Two sides of him were arguing over morals and what the right thing was. Deku wasn't a stranger to Katsuki's behavior. The sports festival was coming up, and he had to convince Katsuki to use his quirk. He knew it would be odd and a bit rude to turn the conversation back to Katsuki's quirk use, but he had to do it. He had to help Katsuki win the sports festival and gain back some confidence. Deku sighed deeply before saying the words he knew would once again change everything. Again, Kaken, you really need to use your quirk? Katsuki groaned unhappily. Not this bullshit again, he snapped harshly. It really wasn't the time or place to come back to this. Deku sharply breathed in. Fine, he spoke much colder than Katsuki was used to. You're too stubborn, you know? I don't understand it. You don't use your quirk because you think it will be hurtful to me. It won't. The last time you thought you were doing something to help me, you instigated suicide. Katsuki's eyes widened as he raised his head to look at Deku in bewilderment. Don't get me wrong, you're not 100% at fault, but you need to stop doing what you think will be better. Deku knew he was being harsh, but especially after the conversation they just had, he had to be harsher. He couldn't keep treating Katsuki's delicately, and using his quirk would only help him heal even more. I'm here to help you. So if you won't use your quirk for yourself, use it for me. Katsuki kept staring at Deku in disbelief. Please. Deku begged him. I need time to think. Katsuki murmured. Deku frowned. He wanted Katsuki to just agree with him, but he knew the healing process would take more time than that. He had to respect the other's wishes, so ultimately he nodded. Then he stood up and started walking towards the stairs where he would leave Katsuki to think things over. It would be good for both of them to have some distance. It had been a while. Loving someone means you never give up on them, no matter how things may seem. I love you, Kaken, and I will support you, quirk or not. But, please do this, if not for yourself, for me. Deku smiled encouragingly at Katsuki. I'll come find you when you're ready. Katsuki stared at the door in which Deku had just left. He was shocked. He had asked for time to think, but he half thought that would only mean they would abandon the conversation entirely. He hadn't expected Deku to just leave like that. Katsuki didn't know how long he stared at the door before he was finally able to pull his eyes from it and turn his body so that his back was facing the door. He couldn't overanalyze what Deku leaving really meant. It wouldn't turn out well, and his mind was already falling into the questions such as, what if he'll never come back? How long had he wanted to leave for? Is he finally happy now? No, he had to think about what Deku had said about his quirk. Katsuki winced as he brought his knees up to his chin and wrapped his arms around them. It made him feel safer. He knew having a quirk as powerful as his was amazing, and so many people dreamed of having it. He never wanted it, and he would gladly give it away if anyone asked him, but that wasn't really possible. That's why you need to use your quirk, Kaken. You have to help those who aren't as fortunate. Katsuki could almost imagine Deku saying it to motivate him. It brought a faint smile to his face. Alas, the smile fell in place of a frown as Katsuki thought about how Deku actually wanted him to use his quirk. He felt as though he was being stabbed when Deku had mentioned how Katsuki's help had never got him anywhere. It was true, but what Deku was trying to say was off. He believed Katsuki could do something good, but he knew better than to trust Deku's biased opinion. Katsuki ran his hands through his hair before raking them over his face. And what was that about, I'll come find you when you're ready? What the fuck did that mean? When he was ready? Did that mean when he would use his quirk? Because that would take a very long time. And how could Deku find him? Well, Katsuki was at Udata, so that might not be too much of a problem. It's not like Deku didn't know where he lived. But where was Deku? Katsuki put his legs down as he thought about how harmful his quirk has been. It's hurt him and Deku. Not to mention he's also hurt his parents and probably other people too. But why had Katsuki not used his quirk for months? The more he thought about it, Katsuki realized he really only stopped using it because of Deku. He didn't really care about those other people, as morbid as it sounded. But they weren't reduced to a little puppy that had to unwillingly follow its owner for the rest of their lives. Katsuki really didn't know anymore. He was a horrible person, yeah. He had only hurt people, sure. But what did that mean for him? What was he to do? The more he thought, the more he frowned. He was being led down a darker path than he wanted. A path Deku usually pulled him out of, but he couldn't do it now. And who knows, maybe it was good for Katsuki to spending time away from Deku? Oh, who was he kidding? He needed that damn nerd. He just wasn't going to admit it anytime soon. Katsuki spent a lot of time mulling over things in his head. So much so that he didn't know how much time had passed. It could have been a few minutes, a few hours, or somewhere in between. If lunch was over, someone would have come and got him, right? Maybe not. His classmates weren't too fond of him, and other classes had no stake in his business. The teachers didn't really care either if you consider what they did at the USJ. Any example. It was all too much. Too many unknowns. He didn't know what to think anymore. Katsuki groaned. His brain was overloaded and it was hard to think. He knew what he should do, what was the right thing to do, and he knew what he wanted to do and what would be better for him to do. So what was the best choice? He didn't know. "'Tis a blessed day, is it not?" An airy voice spoke out from behind Katsuki, surprising him to the point where he might have made a small noise. Of course, if anyone asked, he would deny. The fuck? Katsuki's tone was sharp, but he was genuinely confused. He turned his head to see the Class 1B girl with the plant hair. Plant girl? I was merely reflecting upon the wonder in which is this planet. The girl sounded like a hippie or extremely high, and Katsuki didn't have time for her bullshit. He had some real-life contemplation to get to. Katsuki scoffed at her as he picked up his full lunch and got up to leave. A hand grasping his wrist stopped him from going anywhere. The girl had a hard grip on his wrist, and she looked at him with eyes that sent waves of danger rolling over him. She had an intense stare, however Katsuki didn't let that stop him from glaring right on back with a glare he hoped could rival hers. He wrenched his wrist from her grip and crossed his arms. "What?" he asked gruffly. It wasn't phrased like a question, it was phrased as a threat. The girl's face broke out into a bright smile as she sat down on the roof and crossed her legs. "I was only hoping you'd sit with me on a day like this." Katsuki narrowed his eyes. She wasn't being this nice to him for no reason, she wanted something. Although, it was good to know she didn't spit out religious or hippie nonsense every 5 seconds. He weighed his options. He could either sit with this strange girl, or leave and probably find another spot to eat in solitude, with whatever time he had left of lunch. Katsuki massaged his forehead before finally deciding he really didn't have much to lose. He sat on the floor a good 3 feet away from Plant Girl. He wasn't a fan of people invading his personal space, and Plant Girl didn't seem to mind. "What brings you to this here roof?" Plant Girl was now sitting on her knees with closed eyes, as if she was embracing the wind. "None of your fucking business." Katsuki growls at her and opens his lunch back up in hopes of eating at least a little bit of it. "I see." Plant Girl opened her eyes and regarded Katsuki with a curious gaze. "I heard a devil's pleads from below." Katsuki sighed before slouching a little bit. "Doesn't matter," he turns his body ever so slightly away from her. "Just nothing important." His voice was harsher than he wanted, but it was better this way because now she knew not to try and befriend him. He didn't need friends anyways, either. "Might I be of service to quell those demons?" She talked funny, that was for sure. "No, fuck off." Katsuki grumbled as he stuffed some of his food into his mouth. Deku wanted him to eat more because he'd gone a few nights without dinner, and that made Deku really worried. "Emotional bastard." Plant Girl hummed before turning and lifting her head, again, to feel the breeze across her face. Katsuki just sat in silence, staring at her out of the corner of his eye. There was no use in making small talk, even if this was a bit awkward. Plant Girl seemed contempt, and a small smile blossomed on her face. Katsuki watched as her hair, made up from tiny vines, seemed to wiggle and grow. It was beautiful how her hair flowed with the breeze. It thickened and swirled around her as though it had a mind of its own. It twirled around Katsuki as though he was in the eye of the storm. It was amazing. Katsuki unknowingly smiled at the sight of Plant Girl's dancing hair. He'd never seen someone use their quirk to do something so beautiful. He stared off in wonder as Plant Girl's hair grew at an increasingly alarming rate and expanded, wrapping around both her and Katsuki. Before he knew it, they were in a spacious vine cocoon. Plant Girl opened her eyes, and she gave Katsuki a reassuring smile that made her eyes crinkle. The look of terror on his face at being trapped with her in her own hair had not gone unnoticed. "The world is cut off." Plant Girl nodded her head in thought. Katsuki felt enclosed, he felt trapped. It was not a comfortable situation, and while small spaces never really sent him into a panic, it was an unwelcome occurrence to be enclosed in this small space with Plant Girl. He backed up as far as he could go, his back hitting the vines connected to the girl's head. Katsuki stared at them in amazement, horror, and confusion. He didn't know what to feel about them. "Aren't my vines a beautiful tribute to Mother Nature?" Plant Girl asked innocently, admiring her vines with a sense of proudness. Katsuki didn't know how to respond to that. What the fuck? It ended up sounding more like a question than a statement, to Katsuki's dismay. It was not what he had intended. Plant Girl looked at him with an air of pity, and was that regret? "I did not mean to startle thee." Katsuki snorted, because really she'd done an amazing job. Kudos to her. Nature had only blessed your heavy conscience with calm tranquility. She bowed her head in a sign of respect. And honestly, Katsuki didn't really understand what the hell she was saying, but he deduced she had attempted to erase his distractions and restore peace in him. Although, Katsuki couldn't say it worked because he was probably even more freaked out right now than he was before. He couldn't call it a success, but it did take his mind off Deku, and it was a nice thought. Katsuki wasn't good at making conversation, and he didn't particularly want to, but here goes. What the fuck is up with the way you speak? Oops, that was a bit rude. Whatever, he said what he said. I simply let the words flow through me. Plant Girl didn't seem offended by Katsuki's words at all, which was partly a relief, but a small bit of him wanted her to get mad and walk away. The prospect of being left alone sounded nice at the moment, but he doubted she would just get up and leave. Katsuki gave a slight nod. He didn't particularly care about her answers if all she would do is speak in the cryptic way she usually did, or what he assumed was her usual way of speaking. Nature can be deadly. Plant Girl nodded to herself and gestured around her vine cocoon. But it is also beautiful, entrancing, peaceful. Katsuki furrowed his brow. He didn't know what she was trying to tell him about nature. So it could be dangerous and deadly, but it was also beautiful? Why would he care? The same applies for all quirks. Plant Girl stared at Katsuki as it finally dawned on him. She must have heard some of what he was saying. Or else how would she know about Katsuki having problems with his quirk? Katsuki frowned at her with a menacing glare. You have no business in my problems. He sounded angry because he was. He was very angry that this girl thought with a swipe of her hand he'd been enlightened, or whatever bullshit she sprouted. But no. It didn't work that way, and she was meddling where she shouldn't. I have heard talk. Plant Girl addressed Katsuki. Talk of you? Katsuki's frown stayed fixed on his face. Oh yeah. Indeed. She continued, you don't use your gifts? Katsuki snorted at her. As if you could actually call them gifts? Why is that? She set a curious gaze upon him. Why is it that you feel the need to question me? Katsuki fired back at her. Your opening speech intrigued me, as do you? Katsuki sighed. He didn't want any of the attention from the school, or from her, on him, but look where that went. And USJ didn't him help in the slightest bit. It's none of your business. Katsuki looked down at his lap. He didn't want to have this talk again, and with a stranger at that? No thanks. Fair. However, it weighs on you. Plant Girl pressed. What the fuck do you want? Katsuki exploded. I don't want whatever shitty help you have to offer. She merely sighed in exasperation. She brushed herself off and slower retracted all of the vibes surrounding them. Green plants slithered back towards Plant Girl as she calmly collected herself to speak again. Katsuki was just glad to be rid of the cocoon. It felt as though a veil was being lifted off of him, and his partially touched food which he should really eat. Apologies for the discomfort. Plant Girl didn't seem regretful in the slightest. I wanted to prove something. Katsuki tilted his head in confusion. Prove what? Huh. Beauty. The vines on Plant Girl's head started to wiggle and dance majestically once again, and death. The vines suddenly stopped and poised themselves right at Katsuki's neck. Quirks have multiple sides. The vines relaxed and fell back into place as Plant Girl's hair. And? Katsuki was the slightest bit terrified, confused, and even more intrigued. It takes effort, but no quirk is a sin. Only a sinner makes it so. Plant Girl said in finality before turning her attention back to the sky and the environment. Katsuki's brow creased for the 1000th time today. First Deku, and now Plant Girl are yapping about how he should use his quirk, and that it wasn't evil necessarily. Katsuki thought he was on the highest setting of the bullshit meter, but it looks like it just went up. Still, you are strong. Plant Girl closed her eyes as she let the breeze flow through her hair. I respect that. Katsuki stared at her analytically for a few seconds before turning his attention back to his lunch. The two sat next to each other, in silence. A smile grew on Katsuki's face as he quietly ate. Maybe Plant Girl wasn't so bad. Although he was not strong. No, Deku was strong. He was weak and he wouldn't be using his quirk. The more Katsuki thought about Deku and their argument, the more he worried. There were so many what-ifs, so many loose ends and so many things to be unsure about, it was unsettling. However, Plant Girl's calming presence chasing away many of those more demeaning, angry, and scared thoughts. Yairozu Momo stood, wide-eyed, by the staircase which led back down to the school from the roof. What did she just hear? At first, Momo heard shouting and the sound of crying. Being the naturally curious and caring person she was, she decided to check what was happening. She found Bakugou Katsuki, the talk of the school, standing on the roof screaming at nothing. Well, more like no one. He went on and on about not using his quirk, and being a monster? What? Momo was bewildered. She had never come across anything like this and she wasn't quite sure what to do. Momo never interacted with Bakugou. She had seen him at the field trip to USJ, where he had bravely protected her teachers and classmates. She was witness to his ranting on the incompetence of UA. It was something Momo didn't know about, and it frustrated her to hear that her school was not well protected. Her parents weren't very pleased when she told them either. Overall, Bakugou was always a strange student in Momo's mind. He was stubborn and angry, but now she saw him vulnerable and sad. In the halls, he seemed to hide in corners and stomp around, as if he were trying to disappear and make his presence known all at once. The amount of whispers about him had doubled as well. Rumor had it he had a horrible quirk, but still thought he was better than everyone else. Yet it seemed like he didn't like his quirk. Momo decided right then and there as she watched Bakugou argue with what seemed like himself, she was going to learn who he was talking to and his quirk. If anything, she was going to crack the mystery that was Bakugou Katsuki. As Momo continued to watch Bakugou argue, she felt the underlying urge to come out from her hiding place and quell his troubles. But she didn't know enough about him other than his explosive personality. As far as she knew, he was a threat. After a while, Bakugou became silent as if he just lost. He stared at the door with a shocked look on his face. It was something Momo hadn't seen from the boy, anger being usual when she passed him during the brief times she'd seen him. However, he wasn't alone for long. Momo watched as the plant girl, Shizuki Ibra, from Class 1B, approach Bakugou and start talking to him. Momo felt like she was intruding too much on their personal freedoms, and she turned her back on the pair right before a green cocoon enveloped them, but Momo didn't know that. She sat back down where she was originally eating lunch before the screaming she heard. The roof was a preferable place to eat. It was much easier to carry a tea set up there than in the cafeteria, after all. Momo's hand shook as she raised the porcelain cup to her lips, her grip so tight on it that her knuckles turned white. For the rest of lunch, Momo's thoughts were on Bakugou. Was he insane? Did he hear voices, or was he trying to figure out a problem and saying it out loud was easiest? Momo shook her head. There were thousands of reasons, but the most probably being insanity. Right before the bell signaling the next period rang, Momo pledged to monitor Bakugou Katsuki and learn what exactly was wrong with him. Shinso Hitoshi was miserable. No, miserable wouldn't cover it. He was betrayed, agitated, annoyed, done. That was more like it. He had hoped, well expected, his lunch to go smoothly, albeit a few angry glares from Bakugou and maybe a few arguments. He wasn't expecting half of Class 1A to trail him to his usual table and ask him questions. Well, there were only a few asking questions compared to how many people were there. Hitoshi didn't like drawing unnecessary attention to himself. It never led to good things when it came to him. Recently he had heard rumors about Bakugou and a field trip. He seemed to gather both admiration and criticism for it, but Hitoshi was never one to listen to rumors, instead relying on his own ability to figure shit out. Hi, I'm Kirishima Aijiro. Sorry to bother you, but you're friends with Bakugou, right? Hitoshi groaned as the boy with spiky red hair leaned towards him and waves his hand in front of his face. It seemed to be fruitless to just ignore the group. They were persistent. Too persistent. I wouldn't call us friends. Hitoshi deadpanned as he continued to eat his lunch. What a joy this conversation was turning out to be. That's better than us. Kirishima continued as he took a seat across from Hitoshi. You don't mind if we sit here, right? Hitoshi stared at him without showing emotion. It was a bit late for that question, seeing as he was surrounded by a gaggle of students he didn't know and didn't want to know. Keep it short, what do you want? Hitoshi just wanted to eat his lunch in peace. A girl with short brain hair said as she clasped her hands together, leaving her pinkies apart. Hitoshi wondered what that was about. We wanted to ask if you knew where Bakugou was. She was too cheery in this situation compared to how Hitoshi felt. It was slightly annoying. No, now leave me alone. Hitoshi grumbled as he went back to eating his food, hoping the students would simply walk away. Alas, he wasn't that lucky. We really must see him. a tall boy with blue hair pressed while he waved his hand in front of him to make his point. Hitoshi rolled his eyes before putting his chopsticks down and addressing the boy. Look, I don't care who the fuck you are, but I'm not in charge of Bakugou, so go find him yourself and leave me alone because I really don't care about your problems. Hitoshi picked up his chopsticks and went back to eating his meal. I can see why him and Bakugou are friends. A blonde-haired boy with a black lightning bolt in it murmured. Hitoshi rolled his eyes because, yes, he could hear the boy's stupid remark about him and his explosive acquaintance. Hey, let's be civil here, Kirishima said, trying to keep the peace. Look, I just said the wrong thing to him and I want to apologize to him, so if you see him maybe let me know or something. Sorry to bother you during lunchtime. Hitoshi looked at the group one more time and saw the slightly ashamed looks on each of their faces. Well, on the face of a boy with half red and half white hair, along with a burn mark across one eye, there was only a neutral expression to be found. How curious. Whatever, Hitoshi said in a tired tone, maybe give him time and don't press him. I bet he'd be sitting with me right now if it weren't for you idiots. There was truth to what Hitoshi said. Bakugou was nowhere to be found, and he could only guess it was because of these Class 1A students. It made him wonder, just what did they say? Bakugou was a force to be reckoned with in everything but his quirk. What happened exactly? Hitoshi looked back up at the frowning and ashamed looks on the students. Accompanying them were looks pity. Hitoshi loathed the pitying looks. He received them often. However, after people learned of his quirk, they would often take back their pitying looks for looks of disgust and anger. All for a villain's quirk. Society was fucked up in more ways than he could count, and he could only guess with a quirk like Bakugou's, which was fairly useless. He was either bullied or ignored for the better part of his life. However, considering his loud mouth, it was probably bullying. That would explain his trauma too. Okay, well, thanks. The group of students shuffled away from the table after that. It left Hitoshi to eat his lunch in solitude, surrounded by busy tables with friends chatting to each other happily. It was an odd scene to see the empty plastic chairs surrounding Hitoshi. The bullying Hitoshi had suffered since he manifested his quirk was painful both physically and mentally. But in this moment of solitude, it wasn't pain, it was sadness. A kind of sadness that was almost pathetic, or would find a good home in an art gallery. An empty table among a sea of talking and friendly punches to the shoulder. He could picture the title Lonesome Days. It would either have a flood of admirers and observers, or none at all. But regardless, it wasn't a good experience. Whether or not art-worthy. Maybe sitting with Bakugou wasn't as bad as Hitoshi had originally thought, seeing as he assumed Bakugou didn't care about quirks that much. Or at least enough to treat Hitoshi any differently than before. But that brought up his unexpected visit just now. What had they said to make Bakugou feel the need to avoid them? Hitoshi could only assume it was quirk-related, because that was how everything was these days. It was pretty sick actually. Hitoshi sighed. He was going to show that he could be better than any hero student, regardless of his quirk. It was frustrating how hard the entrance exam was for him because robots were impossible when it came to fighting with his quirk. The sports festival was his chance, and he would succeed. Hitoshi finished his lunch and left the cafeteria with his hands in his pockets and his face downcast. He was walking in the hall to get back to Class 1C when he heard clomping down a staircase that was very close to him. From what he remembered, this staircase led to the roof. Being curious but also very wary, Hitoshi found a wall to hide behind where he could still see the staircase and wasn't seen. Hitoshi narrowed his eyes in suspicion. Who the fuck was coming down from the roof? The noises of feet on stairs grew closer as the people descended down the stairs. Bakugou came down the stairs. So that's where he was. Hitoshi could see the logic in eating on the roof. Bakugou easily avoided the crowds and the annoying hero class students that were pestering about him. Being on the roof explained why he wasn't sitting in the cafeteria with Hitoshi at all. Hitoshi was ready to walk the other way, but another figure came down from the stairs. It was a girl with green vine for hair and an airy presence. Hitoshi remembered her giving the opening speech for Class 1B, the other class studying to be heroes. That's who Bakugou was with. A hero student of all things. The two didn't speak a single word to each other, and instead Bakugou offered her a single nod before heading off towards Class 1C. The girl smiled and waved at his back, before walking back to her own class. Hitoshi didn't know what to think about the two of them being on the roof together. Did Bakugou like hero course students more? Was she a better friend than him? And especially after Bakugou's speech that portrayed some disdain for the hero courses, and now he was all buddy-buddy with them? Something must have happened, but what was it? What did it matter, anyways? Bakugou and him weren't even friends in the first place. There had been a lot of rumors surrounding him recently, and Class 1A's trip to the USJ or something. Maybe he became friends with hero students there, or some bullshit. Regardless, Hitoshi tried to not listen to the rumors that much. Rumors never spawned anything good, at least when they involved Hitoshi or anyone he cared about, but he didn't care about Bakugou, so it didn't even matter. Hitoshi sighed deeply before he leaned his head against the wall in front of him, trying to make his mind blank. He didn't want to think about these things right now, and he had practice in emptying his mind of all thought. It came with the years of bullying. After a while Hitoshi figured out that if his mind was blank he couldn't react to anything. He couldn't give them the satisfaction they wanted. Physical pain would hurt, but it would heal with time, so if Hitoshi could spare himself from the mental pain, then he figured he'd be okay. Hitoshi didn't know how long he blanked out, but he was startled out of by the sound of foots coming down the stairs, and the clank of what seemed to be porcelain maybe? He couldn't exactly tell what it was. Hitoshi gathered up his thoughts, and tried to ignore the blankness and his anxiety, instead thinking about who was coming down the stairs. He carefully stuck his head up to see who it was. He saw another girl coming down the stairs. She was clutching a porcelain tea set in her arms, and she carefully maneuvered around the stairs as to not drop any of the precious china plates and cups. Hitoshi noticed a book wedged under her arm as she attempted to carry too many things at once. He could only guess she was rich. After all, who else would bring a tea set to school? It was a bit absurd. But what piqued Hitoshi's interest was the expression on the girl's face. It was as if she had found out about something she shouldn't have. It was a face of wariness and caution. How curious! Hitoshi was always naturally good at reading people's expressions, but now he excelled at it, after using his skills as one of the only ways to distract himself from his past loneliness. He cocked his head to the side as the girl looked down the hallway cautiously, obviously missing Hitoshi, before heading down the hallway, following where the vine-headed girl went. Hitoshi vaguely remembers her being part of Class 1A, but that was about it. What was she doing on the roof? Hitoshi didn't know if that was her regular eating spot, but his interest was piqued by her, Vine Girl, and Bakugou. They all had something in common. They were all up there for a specific reason, and some little voice in his head told him it was because of Bakugou. Hitsuhei narrowed his eyes. He'd keep an eye on him for sure. The bell rang, dismissing Hitoshi's insecurities and curiosities. He casually strode out from his hiding place and walked back to Class 1C, where he found maybe half of the class sitting and talking with each other. Bakugou and Hitoshi nodded at each other before he sat down, and the day continued. How curious indeed. The room was dark. It was dimly lit by a few lamps casting an orange glow across the walls. Bottles of alcohol were carefully placed on mounted shelves, and most of them were dusty as though no one had used them in a very long time. 2 glass cups with melting ice cubes were on the counter. It was most certainly a bar, and what seemed an abandoned one at that. Except for 2 figures, both stood near a static TV. It was hard to make out too many details in the dim light, but one figure was wearing all black and had a duller periwinkles colored blue hair. It seemed to be natural, and was matted with what was probably sweat and grease. The other figure was wearing a nicely tailored suit. He also wore a large metal collar around where his neck should be. Instead, all that was there was a dark mist with 2 yellow splotches as eyes looking at the TV. Sensei? The blue-haired man spoke out in a raspy voice. What do we do now? It seemed as though he was talking to the television, not the other person who stood in the room with him. Your attack failed? A disembodied voice spoke out from the television, but there will be more chances to end All Might. The blue-haired man flinched at the name in disgust. All Might was clearly a foe, and one whom the group was determined to defeat. The voice from the television spoke again. Although there was no face to accompany the voice, anyone could tell whoever it was had power. The way they spoke was grand and powerful. They were not someone you should mess with. Watch the first year's sports festival. The voice confirmed, you may find someone who piques your interest. And it will be good to lay low for now. Yes, sensei? The blue-haired man nodded before turning back to the misty man in the tailored suit. Kurojairi, make preparations to watch the festival. The blue-haired man smiled creepily with crusty lips and dark bags under his eyes. The misty figure nodded before bowing. We may need some help if you intend to continue your plan. The misty figure finally spoke as he walked behind the bar, and took down an alcohol from the shelf, which had no dust, before pouring it into the cups. They have to be trustworthy. The blue-haired man started to scratch his neck obsessively. The misty man sighed in exasperation. But we'll see. The blue-haired man nodded. Maybe we'll find someone at the festival who will join our ranks. He chuckled a little bit before busying himself in what were his daily tasks and occasionally speaking to the voice in the television. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, except for the fact that these two figures were in an abandoned bar, talking to the television, and making plans to kill All Might, the #1 hero. However, from the corner of the room a gasp could be heard. It came from neither figure, and neither of them reacted in any way to it. The source of the gasp was a woman with black hair and a hero suit on. She had defined muscles, and her usually smiling face was awash with terror and surprise. Nana Shimura gasped as her grandson and nemesis made plans to kill her successor. However, those plans she was already aware of, and were not too surprising for her. No, what was terrifying was the aspect of them watching the sports festival held every year at Udata High School, and that they were looking to recruit. She had to tell Izuku about what was going on, and how much danger he was in, along with his friend. If there was a traitor at Udata, then things would turn bad very quickly. It would turn worse than it already was. Nana always made sure to smile, even if she felt fear or was scared at the moment. Although, she could barely find it in herself to smile at this moment. No one was watching her, she wouldn't let others feel her fear. She had to protect them. Even in death, she would help Izuku to protect the students as she pledged to always do. But at the moment there was only one person she could fear for, one who was involved deeper than she even knew. Kaken,